Hello everyone, you're listening to Sleepwalker Radio. If our stories help you sleep or relax, please like, comment, and subscribe. Now close your eyes, and let's begin. When I was younger, around 14 or 15 years old, my family had this tradition of camping at a state park during the summer. It wasn't anything fancy, just a small clearing where we'd pitch a couple of tents, set up a fire pit, and spend a few days out in the woods. The place was pretty remote. The park had several campgrounds, but they were spaced out enough that you rarely saw anyone unless you went looking. My parents liked it because it was peaceful, away from the noise of town. I liked it because it felt like our own little world, surrounded by tall trees, the smell of pine, and the sound of the wind moving through the branches at night. I had a friend who'd usually come along. His name was Eric. We'd known each other since we were little, and these camping trips were something we both looked forward to. Our favorite part of the whole thing wasn't the fishing or sitting around the campfire. It was what we called the ritual. Every night, after the adults had gone to bed and the fire had died down to glowing embers, we'd grab our flashlights and head into the woods. There was something about walking through the dark forest that felt exciting and a little dangerous, even though we never really expected to find anything out there. It was just us, the trees, and the night. That particular night started like all the others. We waited until the tents were zipped up, the last voices from the adults fading into snores or the quiet rustling of sleeping bags. The air was cool, not cold, but cool enough that I pulled on a hoodie before we set off. The moon was out, though not full, so it cast a pale, thin light that made the shapes of the trees seem even taller and the shadows deeper. We didn't speak as we walked at first. That was part of the ritual too. Just silence, letting our footsteps and the sounds of the woods fill the air. We followed the usual path, a kind of worn trail we'd made ourselves over the years, weaving between the trees and around a small rocky outcrop that we always used as a landmark. After a while, we decided to go further than usual. I'm not sure why. Maybe we just wanted to test ourselves, to see how far we could go before we felt the edge of fear. Or maybe we were just bored of the same old path. So we kept walking, deeper into the woods, where the trees grew thicker and the ground was soft with layers of fallen leaves and pine needles. We had our flashlights, but part of the challenge, part of the fun, was trying to move through the woods without them. We'd switch them off, relying on the moonlight and our eyes adjusting to the dark. It made every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, seem louder and closer. Our senses felt sharper, like we could hear and feel everything around us. We moved slow, careful not to trip or make too much noise. We were about half a mile from the nearest campsite by then, maybe more. Far enough that we couldn't see any glow from campfires, and the night felt like it belonged only to us. That's when we heard it, a soft whispering sound behind us. At first, I thought it was the wind. The trees creaked sometimes when the breeze moved through them, and the leaves could make all kinds of strange sounds. But this was different. It wasn't the random noise of nature. It had a rhythm to it, a pattern, like actual words being spoken, though I couldn't make out what they were. Eric heard it too. I could tell because we both froze at the same time, our heads turning toward the sound. Without saying anything, we both clicked our flashlights on and spun around, shining the beams into the dark behind us. The light cut through the shadows, illuminating trunks of trees, patches of undergrowth, but nothing else. The whispering stopped. The only sound was the hum of the night again, the distant call of an owl, the soft rustle of a breeze through the leaves. We stood there for a moment, listening, our flashlights sweeping the area. But there was nothing. No sign of anyone or anything. Just the woods, quiet and still. After a while, we shrugged it off. Maybe it was just our imaginations, playing tricks on us out here in the dark. We turned the lights off again, wanting to keep to our ritual, and started walking. But then we heard it again. The whispering. This time, it was closer. Still soft, but clearer, like someone trying to speak without being heard, but close enough that we couldn't ignore it. We stopped again, shining the flashlights in every direction. My heart was beating faster now, that uneasy feeling crawling up my spine. The sound seemed to come from just beyond where our lights reached, like whoever it was stayed just out of sight on purpose. We stayed like that for a while, turning slowly, scanning the woods. I could feel the tension in the air, the kind that makes your skin prickle and your stomach feel tight. Neither of us said anything, but I knew we were both thinking the same thing. It was time to head back. We didn't want to admit we were spooked, but we were. So we started back toward camp, walking faster this time, flashlights on, beams cutting through the dark in front of us. And that's when we saw her. At first, it didn't seem real. The figure was low to the ground, moving in a strange, jerky way. When the light hit her fully, we could see she was crawling. A woman, dressed in dark clothes that were smeared with dirt, her hair hanging around her face in messy strands. She was whispering as she moved, random words, no pattern that I could tell, just soft muttering like she was talking to herself. The sight of her stopped us cold. It was one thing to imagine something in the dark. It was another to see it right there, clear in the beam of the flashlight. She didn't seem to notice us at first. She just kept crawling, whispering, her hands and knees dirty from the ground. Then, all of a sudden, she looked up. Our eyes met, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. There was something wild in her eyes, not angry or threatening, just lost. Like she didn't know where she was, or how she'd gotten there. She stood up slowly, swaying a little as she did, and said she was looking for her campsite. Her voice was slurred, and up close we could see the state she was in. She was clearly out of it, drunk, high, or maybe both. Her clothes were torn in places, her shoes caked with mud. She kept glancing around like she was trying to figure out where she was. We didn't know what to do at first. We were just kids, and here was this grown woman, out in the woods in the middle of the night, clearly not in her right mind. After a few seconds that felt much longer, we told her we'd help her. We didn't have a plan, but leaving her out there didn't feel right. So we started walking, back toward the direction of the campsites. She stumbled along beside us, muttering to herself now and then, sometimes falling behind and then hurrying to catch up. We kept the flashlights on, moving as quick as we could without tripping over roots or rocks. Every so often we'd stop and shine the lights around, trying to get our bearings. The woods all looked the same at night, and it was easy to lose the path if you weren't careful. It took a while, longer than it should have, but finally we started seeing the faint glow of campfires in the distance. The sight of them was a relief, like a weight lifting off my shoulders. We led her into the campground area, hoping she'd recognize something. At first, she didn't. She just kept looking around, confused, like none of it made sense to her. We passed a few groups of people sitting around their fires, talking or roasting marshmallows, but no one seemed to notice us right away. Finally, after what felt like forever, we came across a group that she seemed to recognize. She stopped, staring at them for a second, then wandered over. They were a bunch of adults, probably in their 30s or 40s, laughing and talking, not looking worried at all. When she showed up, they acted surprised, but not in the way you'd expect. It was like they hadn't even realized she was missing. We hung back, watching as they talked to her, trying to piece together what had happened. From what we could tell, she'd gotten drunk or high and wandered off looking for a bathroom or something, and no one had noticed she was gone. Eric and I didn't stick around long after that. We didn't want to answer a bunch of questions, and we were tired. We made our way back to our own campsite, feeling drained. The walk back was quiet. Neither of us said much. I think we were both trying to process what had just happened. It was creepy, sure, but also sad in a way. That woman could have been out there all night, lost in the woods, if we hadn't decided to go further than usual. The thought of her crawling around in the dark, whispering to herself, still gives me chills when I think about it. Back at camp, we climbed into our sleeping bags, the sounds of the night filling the air again. The whole thing played over in my mind as I stared up at the roof of the tent, the faint glow of the moonlight coming through the fabric. I remember feeling grateful that we'd found her, but also unsettled, knowing how easily things could have gone differently. That night changed the way I felt about our ritual. We still went on our walks after that, but we never strayed that far from camp again. The woods weren't just ours anymore. They belonged to whatever, or whoever, we might find out there. I had been planning the solo camping trip for a while. I needed a break from the noise, the endless messages, the constant connection. I craved that quiet that only being deep in nature can give. I wanted to be alone, to listen to the wind, to hear the river, to smell the smoke of my own little fire, and fall asleep to the sound of nothing but the world just being itself. So I loaded up my truck with my camping gear, a cooler full of beer, some easy food, my bear spray, my knife, and headed out early in the morning, excited to find that peace I'd been looking for. I'd chosen a valley I'd never camped in before. I'd seen it on maps, Heard about it from a guy at work who swore it was quiet and beautiful, rarely crowded. The kind of place where you could sit and look at the stars without seeing a single other headlamp or hearing a single other voice. That was what I wanted. When I got there, it really was perfect. The valley spread out in front of me, green and soft with patches of tall grass swaying in the breeze, and lined on both sides by forested ridges that rose steep and dark against the sky. A river ran through the bottom, wide enough to make a sound I could hear even from a distance. I felt that good kind of small you feel out there, the kind that makes you realize how much space there is in the world, how much of it has nothing to do with you at all. I parked at a trailhead and set out on foot to explore. I wasn't in a rush. The trail was mostly level, winding along the river, and the air smelled like pine and wet earth. I saw no one for hours. Just birds, a couple of deer that bolted at the sight of me, and the occasional rustle in the brush that I figured was a squirrel or rabbit. I lost track of time. The sun slipped behind the ridgeline before I realized it was getting late. I wasn't worried at first. I had a headlamp, my lighter, plenty of daylight left in the open valley even after the sun dipped. But I knew I needed to find a spot soon. That's when I saw him. I don't even remember hearing him come up. 1 minute I was alone. The next there was this guy walking towards me on the trail. He looked local, worn boots, faded jeans, a shirt that might have been flannel once. His face was lined, tanned, friendly enough looking. He raised a hand in greeting, and I did the same. "Evening," he said. His voice was steady, casual, like we were just neighbors passing by. "Evening," I replied. He asked where I was headed, if I had a spot in mind. I told him I didn't, that I'd lost track of time, and was just hoping to find somewhere flat before dark. He nodded like he understood. "There's a good spot not far from here," he said. "Little ways off the trail. Close to the road, close to the river, but hidden good. Folks won't bother you there." I hesitated. I didn't know him, but he seemed all right, and honestly, I didn't have a better plan. He pointed out the way, gave me directions I tried my best to remember, and then went on his way. I watched him disappear down the trail, then turned and followed the route he'd described. It took me maybe 15 minutes to find it, and he wasn't lying, it was perfect. Flat, soft ground, trees on 3 sides. The river just beyond the tree line where I could hear it, but barely see it. The road close enough I felt I could get out fast if I needed to, but hidden enough no one passing by would spot my camp. I could even see where a fire ring had been built before, just a circle of blackened stones. I got a small fire going, cracked open a beer, and set myself down on a log that had been dragged near the fire ring at some point. I had my buddy's comedy podcast on my phone and let it play loud, not caring if anyone heard. It felt good. The firelight, the taste of the beer, the stupid jokes that made me laugh out loud in the dark. I felt visible, yes, but comfortable, like I belonged there, even for just one night. Setting up the tent felt like too much work after the long day. Besides, the night was clear, the air cool but not cold. I decided I'd just crash in the back of my truck under the topper. I had my sleeping bag, my gear all packed around me. It felt safe, in a way. Solid walls of the truck bed around me. Everything I owned for the night, right there within arm's reach. I listened to the river, let the crackling fire lull me, and eventually, I fell asleep. I woke early, as I always do when I camp. The valley was still mostly in shadow, the sun not yet high enough to clear the ridges. The air was damp and smelled like ash and pine. I stretched, climbed out of the truck, and got the fire going again. I opened a beer, because why not, and started pulling out breakfast stuff. The world was quiet except for the river. I felt that deep calm, that satisfaction that comes from being out in the middle of nowhere, answerable to no one. That's when I noticed him. At first, it was just a shape at the edge of my camp, standing there between 2 trees, still as anything. I blinked, thinking maybe I was seeing a stump or a shadow. But no, it was a man just standing there, watching, or at least standing near enough it felt like watching. He didn't move, didn't say anything, just stood. I stared at him for a long moment, my heart starting to pick up speed. He wasn't the guy from the night before. No, this man looked different, rougher. He had a beard that was wild and tangled, hanging down past his collar. His clothes were covered, completely covered, in plastic grocery bags. They were tied all over him, hanging from his sleeves, his pants, even his hat. They rustled slightly in the breeze. I tried to act normal, even though every nerve in my body was starting to hum with alarm. I called out, said something about how nice the morning was. My voice sounded too loud, too bright in the quiet. He didn't answer, didn't even look at me, just sort of shuffled a few steps closer, still keeping to the edge of my camp, never quite meeting my eye. He moved like he wasn't sure where he was going, pacing a bit, but always keeping me in his peripheral vision. I offered him breakfast, my voice tight. Nothing. No sign he heard. I tried again, offered him a beer. Same. No reaction. It was like I wasn't even there, or like he couldn't decide if I was real, or maybe like he was deciding what I was. He turned his back to me and just stood there. Stood with his back to me, bags rustling faintly, head down like he was listening for something I couldn't hear. My mind was racing now. I kept thinking about the fact I'd been loud last night, visible. Anyone out here could have known where I was, heard my fire crackle, heard me laughing. I thought about how I'd slept so easy, so out in the open really, even in the truck. I thought about how he could have been standing out there in the dark watching me. I felt that cold, sharp edge of fear, the kind that makes your hands feel light and your stomach tight. I didn't want to escalate anything, but I also knew this wasn't going to go anywhere good. My bear spray was at arm's reach, my knife right there too. I picked up the spray, kept it low, tried to sound firm when I spoke. I told him, flat out, that he needed to either look at me, acknowledge me, or leave. I said it loud, clear, no joking in my voice at all. He ignored me, kept his back turned, pacing slow along the edge of camp like he was tracing some invisible line. I stepped forward, just a few steps, enough to show I wasn't going to sit and wait for him to decide. I lifted the bear spray slightly. That did it. He stopped pacing, shoulders slumping like he'd deflated, and then he started moving off. Slow at first, like he hated to go, then faster as he melted back into the trees. I didn't wait. I threw my gear into the truck, not caring about order or neatness. The pan still hot from the fire, I didn't even bother to clean it. I doused the fire with the rest of my water bottle, kicked dirt over the coals, slammed the tailgate shut, and got in. My hands shook as I started the engine, my eyes scanning the treeline for any sign of him. There was nothing, just the quiet valley, the trees, the river. I drove out of there fast, heart pounding, checking my mirrors more than I needed to. The whole way back to town, I kept thinking about the night before, about how easy it would have been for him to slip up on me while I was asleep, how lucky I was I'd chosen the truck over the tent, how easy it would have been for this story to end another way. I don't know what that man wanted. Maybe nothing. Maybe he was just as lost or broken as he looked. But out there alone, it didn't matter. What mattered was getting out safe. And I did. But I don't think I'll camp solo in a hidden spot like that again anytime soon. I don't know if it was just the recklessness of being a kid, or if it was the kind of dumb bravery that comes from thinking nothing can really happen to you. But looking back, that night still gives me chills. I can remember everything about it so clearly, and even now, so many years later, I sometimes think about how close I came to something that could have changed everything. I guess that's why it sticks with me. The realization of how a small choice could have ended so badly, without me even understanding what was happening until it was too late. It started when a few friends and I decided to go camping. We were kids, not little kids exactly, but not old enough to really understand danger the way adults do. We talked about doing this for weeks, maybe months. We planned it out the way kids plan things. Lots of excitement, not much thought for the details. The spot we chose was near one of those places that take people on rafting trips. We'd seen it when our families had driven past on vacations or day trips, and it always seemed like the kind of place where people had fun. The river was supposed to be wild but beautiful, a place for adventure. That's what drew us to it. We didn't leave for the trip until later in the day, mostly because we spent so much time getting our gear together. There was always something else someone needed: a sleeping bag, extra food, a jacket. It felt like it took forever to actually get on the road. By the time we made it to the area near the river, it was already dark. Not just the kind of early evening darkness where the sky is still a little purple at the edges, but real night. The kind where everything looks the same shade of black, unless you shine a light on it. We were tired and hungry, but mostly just focused on setting up our tent before it got any later. That's when I first noticed the sound. At first I thought it was wind moving through the trees. It had that kind of rushing, constant noise, like leaves rustling or branches swaying against each other. But it wasn't like any wind I'd heard before. There wasn't a breeze on my skin. The air felt still, heavy even, like it does on those nights where it might rain but hasn't yet. Still, that sound went on, never stopping, just this low roar in the background that seemed to come from every direction. I remember shining my flashlight around, trying to see if maybe there were big trees or something that could explain it. But the beam of light only went so far before it got swallowed up by the dark. All I saw were shadows and the uneven ground where we were trying to pitch the tent. We didn't talk much about the sound, at least not in any serious way. Maybe we made a few guesses, wind, maybe some animals moving through the woods, but none of us were really concerned. We were more focused on getting camp set up and finding our food. When you're a kid, you don't think about how your mind fills in the gaps. That sound became just part of the night, like the chirping of crickets or the occasional snap of a twig somewhere out in the dark. Eventually, after what felt like forever, but was probably just an hour or so, we had the tent up and our sleeping bags laid out inside. We ate something quick, nothing fancy, just snacks we'd packed. The noise outside never stopped. If anything, it seemed louder now that everything else was quiet. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring up at the thin fabric of the tent, listening to that endless rush. I felt it in my chest, the way you can feel the vibration of a train or a storm coming in. But even then, I didn't really understand what I was hearing. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. Nature was calling, and there was no ignoring it. I lay there for a minute, trying to will it away, hoping I could fall back asleep. But it wasn't happening. I knew I had to get up. I didn't want to wake anyone, so I didn't bother with my flashlight. The moon was out, and at first I thought that would be enough. The inside of the tent had that soft glow you get when moonlight filters through. I figured it couldn't be that dark outside. I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped out. The world outside was different than it had been when we arrived. The noise was still there, that rushing, roaring sound, but now it seemed closer, like it was just beyond the edge of where I could see. The air felt damp and cool against my skin, and for a second I just stood there, trying to get my bearings. I didn't want to just do my business right next to the tent, so I walked a little ways off. The ground was uneven, and I had to pick my way carefully to avoid tripping on rocks or roots. I didn't go super far, just enough that I felt like I wasn't right on top of our camp. When I was done, I stood there for a second, listening. The sound seemed louder than ever. It filled my ears, wrapped around me, and for the first time I felt a little uneasy. Something about it wasn't right, but I still didn't connect it to anything real. I just knew I wanted to get back to the tent, back to where I felt safe. I turned and made my way back, walking slow, feeling the ground with my feet before I put my weight down. It was darker than I'd thought. The moonlight didn't help much once I was away from the open space near the tent. Everything looked the same, shadows and shapes that didn't mean anything. But eventually I saw the outline of the tent, and I felt that little rush of relief you get when you find your way in the dark. I crawled back inside, zipped up the flap, and settled into my sleeping bag. The sound was still there, still roaring in the background, but now I let it fade into the edges of my mind. I was tired, and sleep came faster than I expected. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I noticed was the light streaming through the tent. It was that soft, golden light you get early in the day when everything feels fresh and new. The second thing I noticed was that the sound was still there, but now it was clearer, sharper somehow. I could tell it wasn't wind. It wasn't animals. It was water. Fast, powerful water. I sat up and unzipped the tent, stepping outside into the morning air. The ground was damp with dew, and the sunlight made everything look brighter, safer. That's when I saw it. Not far from where we'd set up camp, maybe only 20 or 30 feet beyond where I'd walked in the dark, was the river. It wasn't a gentle stream like I'd imagined. It was wide and fast and full of whitecaps, the kind of river you'd see people rafting on, fighting to keep control as they rushed downstream. The water moved with force, crashing against rocks and the banks, sending up sprays of foam that caught the sunlight and sparkled like glass. I just stood there, staring at it. My heart started to race, not because of what I saw now, but because of what I realized. In the dark, with no flashlight, I'd walked so close to that river. So close that a few more steps, maybe even just one or two if I'd stumbled, could have put me right into that rushing water. And at night, in that cold, in that current, I wouldn't have stood a chance. The river would have carried me away before anyone even knew I was gone. I thought about how easily it could have happened, how stupid I'd been not to bring my flashlight. All the confidence I'd felt the night before drained out of me in that moment. I felt small, like the world had shown me how fragile I really was. The rest of the morning passed in a kind of daze. My friends eventually woke up, and we went about our usual routine, making breakfast, packing up our gear. But I kept glancing over at that river. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I looked at it, I saw myself falling in, felt the cold grip of the water, heard the roar of it all around me. It was like I couldn't unsee it now that I understood what I'd been so close to. When we left that day, I kept looking back over my shoulder at the river as we hiked away from the campsite. The sound of it faded the further we got, but it stayed in my head. Even now, I can still hear it when I think about that night. The roar of water rushing past in the dark, waiting just beyond where I could see. That trip taught me a lesson I've never forgotten. Always bring your flashlight. Always respect the places you go. And never, ever assume you're safe just because you can't see the danger. Because sometimes danger is right there, close enough to touch, and you won't even know it until it's too late. I used to love being in the mountains. There was a peace to it, a kind of quiet that you can't find anywhere else. The feeling of your pack settling into your shoulders, the steady rhythm of your boots on dirt and rock, the smell of pine and cold air. It all felt right. I went backpacking every chance I got, always looking for new trails, new places to see. But if I'm being honest, as much as I loved the mountains, I always had one fear I couldn't shake, and that was lightning. It didn't start out that way. I used to think storms were beautiful. I'd watch them from my porch at home, the sky split with light, the sound of rain on the roof. But that was before I understood what it really felt like to be caught out in one with nothing between you and the sky. The first time I really understood was at Philmont in New Mexico. I was there with my scout group, and we'd been out for days, moving through that dry, rocky country. Philmont is a place that teaches you respect for the land. The trails wind up and down hills that seem to go on forever, and the horizon stretches so far you feel small in the best way. We'd had a good day that day, covering a lot of ground. The sun was starting to drop lower, casting long shadows, and we set up camp in a spot that looked out over a wide, open area, dotted with scrub and a few tall trees. We were tired but in good spirits, laughing and passing around our dinner, just simple trail food, but after a long day it tasted great. The sky had darkened some, but it wasn't anything that worried us. There were clouds off to the west, sure, but the sun was still shining through the gaps, making everything glow gold. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, that mix of dark clouds and bright light. We weren't in any hurry. We figured if a storm came, it was still a ways off. And then out of nowhere it happened. A flash so fast and bright it didn't seem real, followed by a crack that didn't sound like thunder so much as the world being split in two. The bolt hit a tree maybe 50 feet from where we were sitting. I can still see it in my mind. The way the tree seemed to explode, bark and splinters flying outward, the smell of burned wood filling the air. Every one of us jumped up, our dinner spilling onto the ground, hearts racing. We stood there, stunned, as the echo of that strike rolled away over the hills. It was over in a second, but it didn't feel like it. It felt like time stopped in that moment, like the world had gone quiet just to let that sound fill it. We didn't finish dinner. We couldn't. The food was in the dirt, and none of us could stop shaking. We moved fast after that, getting into our tents, trying to convince ourselves we were safe. The storm rolled through quick, with a few more distant rumbles, but nothing that close again. Still, that strike stuck with me. I lay awake long after the rain stopped, listening for every sound, every shift of wind, afraid it might happen again. That wasn't the last time I had a close call. The worst came a few years later, in Kings Canyon, California. We were doing the Ray Lakes Trail, a beautiful loop through the Sierra Nevada. The mountains there are massive, sharp and gray against the sky, with deep valleys carved by rivers and time. We'd made good time that day, too, and ended up at a campsite by a river. I remember thinking it wasn't the best spot. The valley was tight, with granite walls rising up on either side, and signs of old floods were easy to see. Logs jammed against rocks, debris lines higher than seemed possible. But it was the designated site, and we were tired, so we set up and settled in. It started raining sometime after dark. Nothing heavy at first, just the steady patter on the tent that usually helps me sleep. But at around 2 in the morning, I woke up to a flash that lit the whole world. Even with my eyes closed, I saw it, white and bright, like the sun had come out for a split second. Before I could even take a breath, the thunder hit. It wasn't like thunder I'd heard before. It wasn't a rumble in the distance, or even a sharp crack nearby. It was a sound that felt like it came from inside the earth, or maybe inside me. It shook the ground, the air, my bones. The whole tent seemed to jump, and for a second I thought the world was coming apart. The rain came harder, pounding the tent, and the storm didn't move on like they usually do. It stayed right over us, the lightning so constant, it was like someone was flicking a light switch over and over. The thunder rolled and crashed without pause, one strike following another so fast it all blended together. And the rain, God, the rain. It poured down so hard I thought the river might rise right over us. I kept imagining the water creeping closer, filling the tent, pulling me out into the dark. I was sure we were going to die that night. Either the lightning would find us, or the river would take us. Time lost all meaning in that storm. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes, hours, it felt endless. The tent felt small, so small, like no shelter at all. Every flash made the walls glow, and I could see the outlines of the trees around us, the river, the rocks. It was like daylight and nightmare mixed together. When the storm finally moved on, when the thunder faded and the rain eased up, I lay there shaking, too drained even to move. We made it through, but I never forgot that night. I never forgot the feeling of being so small, so powerless under that sky. The last time was in Switzerland, in the Alps. We were coming down from a long climb, moving through a wide, open area of rock and grass. The views had been incredible all day. Peaks rising sharp against a bright sky, glaciers glinting in the sun. But the weather changed fast, as it does in the mountains. Clouds rolled in, thick and dark, and the temperature dropped. We knew we were in trouble. There was no shelter, no trees, no boulders big enough to hide behind. Just open ground and us caught out in it. The storm hit before we could find cover. Lightning flashed, closer than I'd ever want, and the thunder followed instantly. The strikes weren't just bright, they were blinding, leaving spots in my vision, and the sound was deafening. We dropped down, squatting low, trying to make ourselves small, trying to hope and pray, and will the storm to pass. There's nothing like that kind of helplessness. The rain came cold and hard, soaking us through, and the wind pushed at us, making it hard to stay steady. Every flash made my heart stop, waiting for the pain, the strike that would end it. But it didn't come. Somehow we made it through that too. Since then, I can't look at a storm the same way. I still love the mountains. I still go out, though maybe I'm a little more cautious now. But when I hear thunder, when I see those clouds building, there's a fear that grabs hold of me deep down. Not the kind of fear that makes you freeze, but the kind that makes you want to run, to find shelter, to get somewhere safe. When I'm inside, watching the rain through a window, I can admire the power of it, the beauty. But if I'm out there, exposed, I feel it all over again, that raw, animal fear that reminds me how small I am, how fragile. I think about those nights often, especially the one in Kings Canyon. The way the lightning seemed endless, the way the thunder never stopped. I remember the smell of the rain, the wet earth, the river rushing by. I remember how my heart pounded so hard it hurt, how I lay there waiting for it to end. And I remember the morning after, stepping out of the tent into the gray light of dawn, seeing the steam rise off the rocks as the sun started to warm the valley again. The river hadn't risen enough to flood us. The trees still stood. We were still there. And I remember feeling grateful, more grateful than I'd ever been, just to stand there in that quiet, to breathe the fresh air, to see the world still turning. That's the thing about lightning. It reminds you, whether you want it to or not, of how little control you really have. It doesn't care where you are or what you're doing. It doesn't care if you're ready. It comes when it comes. And all you can do is hope it passes by. Hope you're not the one it chooses. I still go to the mountains. I still walk the trails, climb the peaks, sleep under the stars. But I never forget. I never stop listening for that distant rumble. Never stop watching the sky. Never stop feeling that fear when the storm rolls in. Because once you've felt it, really felt it, you never forget what it means to stand under a storm with nowhere to hide. I remember that trip to Guatemala like it was yesterday. My girlfriend and I had been planning it for months, maybe even longer if I count all the times we had talked about doing something big, something unforgettable. We wanted adventure, something raw and real, and the idea of hiking through the jungle to Tikal sounded perfect. The plan was simple on paper. 3 days of hiking, sleeping at these small ranger camps deep in the jungle, and seeing Tikal at sunrise on the last day. We weren't strangers to camping, but this was going to be something else entirely. The jungle felt like a different world, thick with life, sounds, and smells that were new to us. We started out excited, taking in everything, snapping photos, pointing at birds, monkeys, and whatever else we saw along the way. The air was thick, humid in a way that made every piece of clothing stick to your skin. Sweat dripped down my back and into my eyes, but I didn't care. We were finally there, doing what we dreamed about. The trail was narrow, and sometimes it felt like it would disappear beneath the tangle of roots and leaves. The first night at the ranger camp felt special. It was small, just a clearing with a few rough wooden benches and space for maybe 2 or 3 tents. There was a fire ring where we cooked some basic food and tried to dry out our socks and boots. The rangers were friendly enough, though mostly kept to themselves. They spoke little English, and my Spanish was just good enough to exchange greetings and ask about the trail conditions. That first night, I remember lying in the tent, listening to the jungle. There was no quiet, not really. The place was alive, with the constant hum of insects, the calls of birds, and now and then, a sound that made you stop and wonder what it was. Something moving through the undergrowth. A branch snapping. The low growl of some animal in the distance. It was both beautiful and a little unsettling. But we were tired from the hike, and sleep came easy. The second day was harder. The trail got steeper in places, and the heat seemed worse. We drank a lot of water, but I could feel my legs getting heavier with each mile. My girlfriend, always stronger than me on these hikes, stayed positive, but I could tell she was feeling it too. The jungle closed in tighter, and sometimes it felt like it was swallowing us up. We passed no one that day, just us, the trail, and the endless green. When we reached the second camp, I felt relief more than anything else. It was even smaller than the first, just enough space for a tent or two and a small wooden shelter where the rangers must sleep when they're stationed there. This time, it seemed abandoned. Maybe the rangers had gone off on patrol, or maybe they weren't stationed there at all at that time. It didn't really matter to us. We were just happy to set up the tent, cook something simple, and rest our legs. As the sun went down, we noticed the sky turning darker than usual. There was a heaviness to the air, a stillness that felt strange after the constant buzz of jungle life. The insects still hummed, but the birds had gone quiet. I could feel the storm coming, even before we heard the first distant rumble of thunder. We got inside the tent as the rain started, a soft patter at first that quickly turned into something heavier. The thunder got louder, closer, and soon the rain was pounding down so hard on the tent that I could barely hear anything else. The flashes of lightning lit up the inside of the tent like a strobe light. I lay there, wide awake, feeling the ground shake with each clap of thunder. My girlfriend shifted beside me, neither of us saying anything. What could we say? We were deep in the jungle, miles from anywhere, with nothing but thin fabric between us and the storm. I must have drifted off at some point because when I woke up, it was to the sound of voices. At first, I thought I was dreaming. It was just after 4 in the morning, still pitch black except for the flashes of lightning. But the voices were real. Male voices, speaking quickly in Spanish, though I couldn't make out what they were saying. My heart started racing. My mind went straight to the worst possibilities. Who would be out here at this hour, in this storm? I unzipped the tent slowly, trying not to make a sound. The rain hit me right in the face as I stuck my head out. I could barely see anything at first, but another flash of lightning lit up the clearing. That's when I saw them. 2 figures soaked to the bone, rifles slung over their shoulders, moving toward the camp. I felt frozen for a second. My first thought was to stay inside, but something told me I needed to go out there, to show myself, to not let this be a surprise meeting. I stepped out, my boots sinking into the muddy ground, rain soaking through my shirt in seconds. I turned back toward the tent and told my girlfriend to stay inside, that I'd check it out. She didn't listen. I heard the tent unzip again, and there she was, pulling her jacket on, coming out into the storm. I wanted to tell her to go back in, but there was no point. She was as stubborn as they come. The 2 men approached, rifles held down but still very much there. They looked as miserable as we felt, maybe more. The rain poured off their hats and jackets in streams. I could see now that they were local hunters, probably caught in the storm and looking for shelter. They looked at us, and I could see in their faces that they weren't a threat, just 2 guys trying to get out of the weather. I motioned toward the little shelter and then toward our stove, offering coffee. They nodded, grateful, and we all moved under the wooden roof, such as it was. The place leaked like crazy, but it was better than standing out in the open. I fired up the stove, my hands shaking from the cold and maybe a little from the adrenaline. The coffee was instant, nothing fancy, but it felt like the best thing in the world right then. The hunters wrapped their hands around the cups, steam rising up and mixing with the rain. We stood there in that tiny shelter, for people brought together by the storm, and for a moment it felt almost peaceful. The rain kept hammering down, the thunder shaking the ground beneath us. The lightning was so close now that I could feel the electricity in the air, like the whole jungle was charged. And then it happened. There was a sound I'll never forget, a crack so loud it drowned out everything else, followed by a deep, earth-shaking thud. A massive tree, maybe one that had been dead inside or weakened by the storm, came crashing down. I didn't even see it fall at first. It was too dark, too fast. But when the next flash of lightning came, I saw it, lying across the clearing, right on top of our tent. The tent was flattened, completely crushed beneath the weight of the trunk and branches. My stomach turned at the sight. If we had been in there, if I hadn't heard those voices, if I hadn't gone out to see what was going on, or worse, if my girlfriend had stayed inside like I told her to, we would have been under that tree. We would have been dead. No question about it. The hunters stared at the fallen tree, then at us. They knew. No words were needed. We all just stood there for a long time, listening to the rain, feeling the weight of what had just happened. The storm raged on, but somehow it felt like it had calmed, at least inside me. We were alive. Somehow we were alive. I kept thinking about how small the choices were that led to that moment. How easy it would have been to stay inside, to tell myself the voices were just the wind, to go back to sleep. How easy it would have been for my girlfriend to stay in the tent, to listen to me for once. And if any of that had happened, if we'd stayed put, we'd have been crushed without even knowing what hit us. We waited out the storm as best we could in that little shelter, huddled together, wet and cold but thankful. When the sun finally started to rise, the rain eased up, and we got our first good look at the damage. The tree was huge, its branches spread out like a net over what was left of our camp. The tent was nothing but a mess of torn fabric and broken poles, pinned under the weight of the trunk. There was no saving it. Our gear inside was done for, smashed or soaked through. But none of that mattered. We were alive. We shared what little food we had left with the hunters that morning, sitting on the wet ground, eating in silence. The storm had passed, leaving behind a jungle that felt cleaner somehow, like the air had been scrubbed fresh. When we finally packed up what we could and started the hike out, I kept looking back at that tree. I couldn't stop thinking about it, about how close we came. Every step felt heavier, but not from the weight of my pack, from the weight of what could have been. We made it to Tikal, saw the sunrise just like we planned. But the memory of that night stayed with me, clearer than the ruins, clearer than the view from the top of the temple. I don't think I'll ever forget it. The jungle gave us a reminder that night, one I still carry. Sometimes it's the smallest decisions that keep you alive. And sometimes you don't even realize how lucky you are until you're standing in the rain, looking at what could have been your grave. It was late in the summer of 1987, and I was in my early 20s. I remember the heat still hanging heavy in the air, the kind of heat that clings to your skin even as the sun starts to dip below the horizon. My friends and I had planned this camping trip for weeks. The idea was to get away from work and enjoy the quiet that Central Florida parks could offer. 2 of us worked for the Park Service back then. That meant we knew the land, the rules, the animals, the plants. We could also camp for free in certain parks, which helped since we didn't have much money to spare. Our third friend, though, was new to all of it. This was her first camping trip ever, and she was excited, nervous, and curious all at once. We chose a youth camping area that weekend. Normally, it would be full of scout groups or school trips, but for some reason, no one else had reserved it. It was more isolated than the regular campgrounds. No RVs humming in the background, no kids riding bikes along the gravel paths, no chatter from neighboring campsites. Just the 3 of us, surrounded by woods thick with pine, oak, and palmetto, the air filled with the smell of warm earth and dry leaves. We spent the first day setting up camp. We pitched 2 tents under a big oak near the edge of the clearing and built a fire ring from the rocks we found scattered along the path. The firewood was dry enough that it crackled to life as soon as we set a match to it that first night. We cooked simple meals, hot dogs on sticks, foil packets of potatoes and onions, things that didn't take much effort. The night was peaceful, and even though it stayed warm well into the evening, a soft breeze made it bearable. That first night passed without anything unusual. We sat by the fire talking about work, friends, places we wanted to travel. We pointed out constellations through gaps in the trees. The sky out there was clearer than in town. Every star looked sharp and close enough to touch. The second day started just as calm. We hiked a few trails early in the morning before the heat got too bad. We saw deer tracks in the sand, and once we startled a wild turkey that took off with a loud clatter of wings. We stopped to watch a gopher tortoise making its slow way across the path. By afternoon, we were back at camp, tired and sweaty, but happy to be away from work and noise. That's when we sort of spread out. My coworker was fixing something in one of the tents. My friend was reading in a folding chair by the fire ring, and I wandered off a little ways to collect firewood. We weren't out of sight of each other, but we weren't clustered together either. The forest was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears once you notice it. I could hear the soft crunch of my boots in the dry leaves, the occasional buzz of a cicada. Every so often I'd pick up a branch and snap it across my knee if it was too long for the fire. I moved slow, enjoying the peace, but every now and then, something made me stop. It was like I could feel eyes on me. I'd stand there, holding whatever branch I just picked up, and look around. The trees stood still, the underbrush didn't move, and I couldn't hear anything out of place. No footsteps, no rustle that didn't belong. Just that stillness. I'd tell myself I was being silly, that it was just the quiet playing tricks on me, and I'd go back to gathering wood. The afternoon wore on like that. The sun started dipping low, casting long shadows that stretched through the trees. The air took on that heavy, golden quality that comes just before dusk in the woods. I carried my load of wood back to camp, and we got the fire going. The light from the flames flickered on the trunks of the trees at the edge of our clearing, making them seem to sway just a little even though I knew they were still. Not long after, one of the rangers who lived nearby came over in his truck. He brought more firewood, more than we needed, and a six-pack of beer. We sat around with him for a while, talking and laughing, enjoying the company. The ranger was easy to talk to. He told stories about the park, about dumb things visitors had done, about close calls with gators and snakes. It felt good, sitting there as the dark settled in, the fire crackling, the beer cold in our hands. At some point, we started hearing voices. Faint at first, like an echo on the wind. It was probably a group of teenagers on one of the trails. The trails were supposed to be closed by sunset, so the ranger and my coworker decided to drive out and shoo them back toward the regular campsites. They left in the truck, the headlights cutting through the dark for a moment before they disappeared down the path. That left me and my friend by the fire. She leaned back in her chair, legs stretched out, staring up at the stars starting to peek through the branches overhead. I poked at the fire with a stick, breaking up the coals so the heat would spread better. It was peaceful for a while, the kind of peaceful that makes you forget about everything else. But then, out of nowhere, something changed. I felt it before I heard or saw anything. The air seemed heavier, colder. I felt a shiver run down my spine, even though the fire was still burning strong. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. I tried to brush it off. Maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd had one beer too many on an empty stomach. But the feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. The quiet that had felt peaceful before now felt wrong. It was like the forest itself was holding its breath. I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to scare my friend. But I glanced over at her, and in that instant, I knew she felt it too. Her eyes were wide, and her body was stiff. She looked at me, her face pale in the firelight, and I could see that she was as scared as I was. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. We both knew something wasn't right. We got up slowly. I tried to act casual, like we were just calling it a night, but every part of me was screaming to run. We started toward the car, walking at a normal pace, not wanting to look like we were in a panic. But the feeling kept building. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The shadows between the trees seemed darker, thicker, like they were hiding something just out of sight. Halfway to the car, we both broke into a run at the same time. No signal, no word. Just pure instinct. We sprinted across the clearing, the gravel crunching under our feet, the fire behind us casting wild shadows. We reached the car, flung open the doors, and jumped inside. I locked the doors and grabbed my pistol from the glove box. I knew in my gut that it wasn't enough. Whatever was out there, I felt sure it could tear through the car like it was paper. But having it in my hand gave me something to hold on to. I turned on the headlights, hoping the beams would push back whatever was out there. The woods in front of us were just trees and brush, nothing unusual. But I didn't trust it. I kept my eyes straight ahead, afraid that if I looked out the side window, I'd see something I couldn't handle. My friend sat beside me, hands clenched in her lap, staring out at the same spot I was, breathing fast and shallow. Time stretched. Every second felt like a minute. I could feel the weight of whatever it was pressing against us, like we were being watched by something that meant us harm. My mouth was dry, my hands slick with sweat. I kept the pistol on my lap, finger resting alongside the trigger guard, not daring to move it. The firelight flickered in the distance, just visible through the windshield, but it felt a million miles away. And then, as suddenly as it came, it was gone. The pressure lifted. The air felt normal again. I took a deep breath and realized I'd been holding it. My friend let out a shaky sigh. We sat there for a few more minutes, not ready to move, not ready to trust that it was really over. But the feeling didn't come back. The forest felt like itself again, quiet, still, but not watching, not waiting. After what felt like forever, we saw headlights bouncing through the trees as the ranger and my co-worker came back. They parked next to us, got out, and came over asking if we were okay. We told them we'd just been spooked, laughed it off as best we could. But inside, I was still shaken. I've faced a lot of things since then, bad storms, angry animals, dangerous people. But nothing ever filled me with that same bone-deep terror. We stayed in the car a while longer before we finally got out and put out the fire for the night. We slept in the car, not wanting to go back into the tents. The rest of the trip passed without anything strange happening. But even now, all these years later, I think back to that night. I don't know what was out there. Maybe it was an animal, maybe a person, maybe just the forest playing tricks on two tired minds. But I've camped a lot since then, and I've never felt that way again. Whatever it was, I still believe we were in real danger that night, and we were lucky to walk away unharmed. We were deep in the wilderness, farther than I'd ever been before. Saskatchewan is already remote, but this was something else. An isolated stretch of land only accessible by canoe, compass, and the kind of stubbornness you grow into after years of doing this sort of thing. My wife and I had been taking these kinds of trips together for over a decade. We'd done portage routes, lake chains, and rivers that barely got a mention on the map. This one was different, though. More isolated, more wild. No cell towers, no cabins, no trails. Just water, trees, and the occasional animal track in the mud to let you know something else had passed through. We had planned this particular trip for months. A week-long canoe loop through the northern backcountry. The route started with a long paddle across a broad, still lake. From there, we'd portage through a chain of smaller lakes, navigating fallen logs, beaver dams, and the occasional winding creek. We packed light, freeze-dried meals, oats, a bit of trail mix, and some fishing gear in case we had the time or energy to catch something fresh. Everything fit neatly into dry bags, lashed to the bottom of the canoe. By the third night, we were farther from civilization than most people ever get in their lives. No motorboats, no distant highway hum, no overhead airplanes, just silence. Thick, constant silence that pressed on your ears, broken only by the shifting wind or the occasional loon calling across the lake. That night had been uneventful. We'd pitched the tent in a little clearing tucked into the trees just beyond a short, rocky shore. We set it on a patch of mossy, flat ground beneath a stand of spruce and birch. The lake was glassy and calm, black with the coming night. We'd eaten a quiet dinner, dehydrated stew, if I remember right, and washed our dishes well away from the tent to keep from drawing attention. Hung the food high in a tree, as we always did. All the precautions. Always. It becomes second nature when you spend enough time out there. We turned in not long after the sun went down. With nothing much to do once darkness falls and no firewood worth the trouble, you find your rhythms shift quickly. The body starts to sync with the forest. You sleep earlier, wake earlier. That night was cold. Not freezing, but the kind that seeps in slowly as you sleep. I remember waking up a couple of times during the night to shift positions and pull the sleeping bag tighter around me. The ground felt colder than usual. The air inside the tent had that crisp edge, the kind that nips at your nose when you turn your face toward the mesh windows. At some point just before dawn, maybe 5, maybe 6 in the morning, I wasn't really awake enough to check. I heard something. A rustling. At first, I thought it was the wind through the leaves. You get all kinds of noises out there, and most of them don't mean anything. I closed my eyes again, but it didn't stop. In fact, it got louder, closer, more deliberate. It wasn't the wind. The movement was low, steady, and brushing up against the tent. You learn quickly that certain sounds mean different things. A squirrel moves quickly, like it's in a rush. Birds rustle the underbrush in quick, jittery bursts. Deer tend to be silent until they're spooked. This sound was heavy, shuffling, something big moving just feet away from where we slept. Still groggy, I sat up, careful not to rustle the sleeping bag too much. I was trying to figure out what I was hearing. My heart wasn't racing yet. It was still early. Still that groggy, dreamlike state where nothing feels urgent. But the sound didn't stop. If anything, it got louder. It was right behind the tent, right behind my side of the tent. Then, before I could process anything or even move, my entire side of the tent collapsed. The fabric came down over me like a sack. Poles snapped, the structure sagged, and something heavy pushed in from outside, pinning me down. For a second, I couldn't breathe properly. Not because I was hurt, but because the shock of it froze everything in me. There was a moment of dead silence. No sound, no breath, just weight and confusion and cold nylon pressed against my face. Then it lifted. As quickly as it came down, the weight disappeared. I gasped, yanked the sleeping bag off me, and scrambled to find the zipper on the tent. Everything inside was a mess. Our bags had slid to the side, and the pole had buckled. My wife was sitting up beside me now, her face pale, eyes wide. Outside, maybe 10 feet away, a black bear stood facing us. It wasn't charging. It wasn't growling. It was just there, standing in the soft, early morning light. Its black fur looked almost blue in the shadows. Its ears were perked forward. It looked confused, almost embarrassed, like it had made a mistake and didn't know what to do about it. The bear wasn't massive, but it was still big enough to be terrifying. Probably a young adult, judging by its build. Not quite the lumbering giants people picture, but still a solid wall of muscle and instinct. The tent had gone dead quiet. Everything was still except the sound of birds beginning to stir in the trees. I didn't move. Neither of us did. We just watched. The bear took a couple slow steps backward, looked at the collapsed side of the tent again, and then, as if shaking off a mistake, turned and ambled back into the trees. Not a run, not a frantic retreat, just a kind of cautious, backward glance, followed by a quiet disappearance into the brush. We sat there for a long moment before moving. My heart finally caught up to what had happened, hammering away in my chest. I pulled on a jacket and stepped out barefoot, scanning the area. The bear was gone, though the trail it left through the wet bushes and trampled grass was clear. The tent was half collapsed. One pole was bent, not broken, but definitely out of shape. Our gear had been shoved to one side from the impact, and the outside wall had a smudge of mud and bear fur. There were prints behind the tent, deep, fresh impressions in the soft earth. The back of the tent had been pitched just a couple feet from a thick patch of bushes. We figured the bear had been foraging, maybe rooting around in the underbrush, when it lost its balance or slipped on the damp ground and tumbled backward into the tent. I had been sat on by a bear. That's not something you expect to say in your life. And the truth of it is, the actual event lasted all of maybe 10 seconds. But those seconds, those slow, half-asleep moments when your brain can't understand why your world is suddenly caving in, those seconds feel like an eternity. We spent the rest of that morning cleaning up. There wasn't any real damage, just shaken nerves. We debated whether to break camp immediately or stay for breakfast. In the end, we stayed. We made coffee over the little camp stove and talked quietly about what had happened. We didn't want to scare each other more than we already were, but the tension stayed with us the rest of the day. We didn't see the bear again. Still, that feeling never really left. The sense that something that large and powerful could just wander so close without us hearing it. That it could literally fall on top of us without meaning to. It reminded us that no matter how careful you are, no matter how experienced or prepared, you're not in control out there. Not really. You're just another creature in the woods, sleeping in a bag on the ground. We finished the trip, but our nerves were tighter after that. We double-checked every tree for food hanging. We picked sites farther from thick brush. We stayed more alert, even when we were exhausted. It didn't ruin the trip, but it changed the tone. Everything felt closer, sharper, like the forest was watching us just as much as we were watching it. It became a story we told friends after we got back. They'd laugh. They'd ask questions. They'd joke about the bear picking the wrong campsite. But to me, it wasn't funny. Not really. Not when I closed my eyes and remembered the wait. Not when I thought about what might have happened if the bear had reacted differently. If it had been startled. If it had panicked. But it didn't. And we were lucky. Somewhere out there, in the middle of that vast nowhere, a bear probably had its own little moment of confusion. A story it never shared. Just a clumsy tumble into a strange nylon cave, then the sight of two pale humans staring back, as surprised as it was. We finished our trip without further incident. Paddled the last stretch of the route under gray skies and light drizzle. Got back to the truck, loaded up the canoe, and drove south, back toward noise and people and buildings. But that moment never left me. It still hasn't. And whenever someone asks if I've ever seen a bear up close, I just nod and say yes. Because not many people can say they've been sat on by one. I was 16 when it happened, and even though years have passed, I can still remember every little thing about that night as if it only happened yesterday. It was during my student exchange program in the United States, in New Mexico to be exact. I'm not from the US, and everything about the place felt strange and different to me at first, but I had grown used to it over the months I had been there. My host family was kind and welcoming, a dad, a mom, and two daughters who were close to me in age. Near the end of my stay, they decided to take me camping as a way to give me one last American experience before I went back home. I was excited about it. I had been camping a few times before, but this felt like something special. We packed up the car early that morning, filled it with sleeping bags, tents, food, and other things we'd need for a night out in the wild. I remember how the dad kept joking about how I'd see what real stars looked like without city lights getting in the way. The drive took a couple of hours, with long stretches of empty road and desert landscape on either side. I stared out the window most of the time, watching the dry land pass by, dotted with low shrubs and scattered trees. The sky seemed bigger there than anywhere else I'd been. After a while, we turned onto a dirt road that led us deeper into what felt like nowhere. There were no other cars, no buildings, nothing but the land and the sky. Eventually, we stopped at a clearing surrounded by trees and rocky hills. It was quiet, except for the sound of the wind moving through the branches. We set up camp as the sun started dipping lower in the sky. The dad showed me how to get the tent stakes into the hard ground, and the mom unpacked food for later. The two daughters, both friendly and full of energy, helped me gather firewood. They seemed to know the area well, moving confidently through the trees. When the tents were up and the fire was crackling, we all sat around it, roasting marshmallows and talking about nothing in particular. It felt peaceful, like we were the only people in the world out there. When it started to get dark, the two daughters and I decided to do a little exploring. We were full of restless energy, and the idea of climbing a tree to get a better view of the stars seemed fun. There was a tall tree a bit away from the campsite, just past a small rise and a cluster of boulders. We made our way there, joking quietly so as not to disturb the parents who were happy to relax by the fire. The tree was easy enough to climb. It had strong, low branches that we could grab onto, and we made our way up slowly, laughing a bit as we tried not to get scratched by the rough bark. The night air was cooler up there, and from the higher branches we could see out over the trees and rocks around us. The sky was deep blue and filling up with stars, brighter than I had ever seen them before. We sat there for a few minutes, catching our breath, looking out at the landscape. It felt peaceful, calm, and then everything changed. Out of nowhere, we heard it. A voice calling my name. It wasn't just any voice. It was the voice of the younger daughter, the one who was sitting just below me on the branch. I froze completely, not knowing what to think or do. The voice came again, calling my name clearly. It sounded exactly like her, no difference at all. But she wasn't saying anything. She was silent, just as stunned as I was. My heart started to pound. I remember gripping the branch tighter, feeling the rough bark dig into my palms. The sound echoed a little in the still night, carried on the breeze, and it made my skin crawl. My name, in her voice, again and again. The exact way she would say it, with the right rhythm, the right tone. But it wasn't coming from her mouth. She was right there. I could see her, I could hear her breathing, but not speaking. It kept going, for what felt like forever, though in reality it was probably about 5 minutes. The voice called out from somewhere beyond the tree. I couldn't place where exactly it was coming from. It seemed to move, first from one direction, then another. It was as if whoever, or whatever, was doing it was trying to confuse us. Or maybe it was just the way the sound traveled through the trees and rocks. I could feel the fear building in my chest, a kind of cold, heavy feeling that made it hard to move. I remember glancing down at the girl, seeing the wide-eyed look on her face, and then looking out into the darkness, trying to see if anyone was out there. But there was nothing. No movement, no shape I could make out. Just the sound of my name, over and over. Finally, it stopped. Just as suddenly as it had started, it ended. The night was quiet again, except for the sound of the wind and our breathing. For a moment, none of us moved. Then, without a word, we started climbing down. Our movements were quick, clumsy even, as the panic started to really hit us. When we reached the ground, we didn't stop to look back. We ran. The dry grass and twigs crunched under our feet as we bolted back toward the campsite. I could feel my legs burning, my lungs straining, but I didn't care. I just wanted to get back to the fire, to the safety of the adults. When we got there, the mom and dad were still sitting by the fire, looking relaxed, enjoying the night. But as soon as they saw us, out of breath and clearly terrified, everything changed. The dad's face went pale in an instant. His expression shifted from confusion to something I can only describe as alarm. I remember the way he stood up so fast his chair nearly fell over. Without asking questions, without waiting to hear the whole story, he told us to grab our things. His voice was firm, urgent. The mom didn't even argue. She just started helping us pack up, her face tight with worry. We moved fast, shoving sleeping bags, food, and gear into the car. The fire was left to burn itself out. Within 5 minutes, we were pulling out of that clearing, the tires kicking up dust as we sped down the dirt road. The dad kept glancing in the rearview mirror, as if expecting to see something following us. The drive back felt longer than it had on the way in. The car was silent. No one said a word. I kept looking out the window at the dark landscape, half expecting to see some figure in the distance. But there was nothing, just the empty land, the night, and my reflection in the glass. When we got back to their house, it was late. We unpacked just enough to get inside, and the parents locked the doors and checked the windows. The dad stayed up for a while, sitting in the living room with the lights off, looking out the window. I could see him from where I was trying to fall asleep, but sleep wouldn't come easily. My mind kept going back to that voice. The way it sounded exactly like the girl. The way it had seemed to move around. And the look on the dad's face when we told him. The next morning, the mood was different. The parents acted normal, but there was a tension there, like something unspoken hanging in the air. I wanted to ask the dad what had scared him so much, but I didn't, and he never brought it up. Every time I tried to work up the courage to ask, he would change the subject or walk away. Eventually, I stopped trying. I never did find out what he was so afraid of, or what he thought was out there that night. But I've thought about it a lot over the years. I've tried to come up with explanations that make sense. Maybe it was someone out there playing a prank. Maybe there was another camper nearby who heard us and decided to mess with us. But who would be that deep out in the middle of nowhere? And how would they have known my name, or how to say it in the exact voice of the girl I was with? I even thought maybe it was an animal of some kind, maybe a bird that could mimic voices, like a parrot. But in New Mexico, out in the wild, that didn't seem right either. What really stays with me, though, is the feeling I had when I heard it. That cold, sinking feeling that told me something wasn't right. I've been scared before, but nothing has ever made me feel that way again. It wasn't just fear of the unknown. It was the fear that comes when something breaks the rules of what you know to be possible, when you hear or see something that doesn't fit into your understanding of the world. The memory of that night is burned into my mind. The way the air felt, cool and dry. The way the stars looked, so clear and bright above us. The sound of my name, echoing through the trees in a voice that shouldn't have been there. And the way we ran, not looking back, just wanting to get away. I can still hear the crunch of our footsteps, the rush of blood in my ears, the pounding of my heart, and the silence that followed when it was over, that heavy, empty silence that made the night feel even darker. I never went camping again during the rest of my stay in the US. And I don't think I would now, not in a place like that. I still like to be out in nature, but I stick to places where other people are nearby, where there are lights and sounds and signs of civilization. That night taught me that sometimes the quiet places can hold things that we don't understand. And sometimes it's better not to go looking for answers. Because even now, all these years later, I don't have one. And maybe I don't want one. I had always liked walking home from school. It gave me time to clear my head, listen to music, and just enjoy a bit of peace before getting home. That day felt like any other at first. The air was warm but not too hot, and there was a soft breeze that made the trees sway gently on either side of the narrow path I usually took through the woods. I remember I had taken a little extra care that morning picking out my outfit. I liked what I wore, even if it drew some stares sometimes. I had on a skirt, not too short, and some black shorts underneath, because I didn't want to worry about anything. I also wore stockings that clung to my legs. I felt confident when I left the house that morning, but by the time I started my walk home, all I wanted was to get through the day and forget about it. I had my headphones in, and my music turned up as loud as I could stand. It helped me block out the world. I was in my own space, humming along quietly, not really watching where I was going, just following the path I knew so well. At first, I didn't think anything of the feeling behind me. Something brushed my leg, just lightly, like maybe a branch or even the wind. I kept walking. A few more steps and it happened again, this time a little stronger, like someone had let their hand graze the back of my skirt. I froze for a second, confused, and turned my head just enough to glance back. That's when I saw him. A man, way too close, just inches behind me. His face startled me. He looked as surprised as I was, maybe because I noticed him or maybe because I screamed. I couldn't help it. It came out loud, cutting through my music and the quiet of the woods. I even muttered an apology, though I don't know why. He didn't say a word. He just looked down, flustered, and hurried past me, walking fast, almost like he was embarrassed or trying to act like it wasn't what it was. I stood there for a second, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. My mind raced, trying to explain it away. Maybe he was just in a hurry. Maybe he didn't mean to get that close. But deep down, I knew something felt off. The way he was behind me, how close he had been, the weird feeling like he was trying to look up my skirt. It made my skin crawl. I waited a bit, letting him get far ahead before I started walking again. I couldn't shake the nervous feeling, so I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting him to be there again. By the time I got to the edge of the woods and back to the street that led to my apartment complex, I was exhausted, not from the walk, but from the tension that had built up. I took my time, stopping at a little bench near the entrance to the complex, trying to calm down, telling myself I was overreacting. I watched people come and go, cars pulling into parking spots, normal everyday stuff. It helped a little. I took deep breaths, texted a friend, scrolled on my phone for a bit. I thought about grabbing something to drink from the corner store, but decided against it. I just wanted to get home and put the whole weird encounter behind me. When I finally made it to my building, I saw someone standing under the stairwell that led up to my apartment. I hadn't seen him before, at least I didn't think so. He was dressed kind of like a lot of guys at my school, wearing a hoodie with the hood up and basketball shorts. Nothing about him screamed danger at first glance. I figured maybe a new neighbor or someone waiting for a friend. But as I got closer, he moved, stepping right under the stairs, almost like he was trying to hide. That struck me as strange, but I kept going. My mind was still tangled up in what had happened earlier, and I didn't want to jump to conclusions. As I started up the stairs, I noticed he wasn't just standing there. He was positioned in a way that let him look up through the gaps in the stairs. I could feel his eyes on me, feel the weight of his stare. My stomach twisted. I felt that same sick, crawling feeling all over again. I glanced down and caught sight of him, phone in hand, pointing it up towards me. I could see the screen, see that he was trying to take pictures. My heart raced, and my hands shook as I fumbled with my phone, trying to unlock the door to my apartment. I have one of those electronic locks that works through an app on my phone. Normally, it's convenient. That day, it felt like a nightmare. The app wouldn't connect, no matter what I did. I tried again and again, but the door stayed locked. Panic rose in my chest. I was stuck, trapped between the locked door and this guy under the stairs. I tried to stay calm, tried to think, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I took a deep breath, glanced down again, hoping he had left. But he hadn't. He was still there, only now it was worse. He wasn't just trying to take pictures anymore. He had his hand down his shorts, moving in a way that made me want to be sick right there. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It didn't feel real, like maybe I was imagining it, but I wasn't. He was really there, doing that right under my stairs, right beneath me. I backed away from the door, trying to stay out of sight. I didn't know what to do. My mind raced through options. I thought about calling the police myself, but I was so shaken I couldn't even think straight. Instead, I called my dad. I didn't even have the words at first, just trying to explain what was happening. He told me to stay where I was, that he'd call the police, and that they'd be on their way. I felt a little safer knowing help was coming, but every second felt like forever. I didn't know if this guy would try to come up the stairs, or if he'd just stay down there. I didn't want to wait and find out. I shouted down at him, telling him to leave, trying to sound braver than I felt. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look up. I didn't know if he was dangerous, if he'd get angry, if yelling at him would make things worse. I couldn't risk staying there. I needed to get to a place with people, with a phone that worked. The community office at the front of the complex wasn't too far. I made up my mind. I took a deep breath, tried to steady myself, and bolted down the stairs. I didn't look at him, didn't stop. I just ran. My legs felt like they might give out, but I kept going, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear anything else. I glanced back once I was clear of the stairwell. He wasn't there. I didn't know where he'd gone, and I didn't care. I ran all the way to the office, burst through the door, and found someone inside. My hands were still shaking, my voice barely working, but I managed to explain enough for them to understand. They offered to call the police too, but I told them my dad already had. I stayed there, safe inside, until my phone finally connected, and I saw that my dad had unlocked the door for me remotely. I waited a little longer, just to be sure, then made my way back to the apartment once I knew the police were on their way. The officers came not long after, took my statement, asked me to describe the guy as best I could. I told them everything, every detail I could remember, from the woods to under my stairs. They said they'd patrol the area, keep an eye out. But they didn't find him. I don't know if he lived nearby, if he was just passing through, or if he'd been watching me longer than I realized. I didn't see him again after that. I kept looking over my shoulder for weeks, flinching at shadows, double-checking my door lock before I even got to the stairs. I changed the way I walked home, avoided the woods, stayed where there were always people around. Even now, thinking about it makes my heart race. I never expected something like that to happen so close to home. I just hope wherever he is, I never cross paths with him again. I've had my share of strange and unsettling experiences in the woods, but I think about a handful of trips more than the rest. The kind of memories that settle in and stay with you, not because of any ghost stories or strange creatures, but because of that cold grip of unease you feel when things just don't sit right. Sometimes it's the raw power of nature reminding you how small you are. Other times it's people, other humans, doing things that make you feel like you don't belong in that part of the world at that moment. And sometimes it's just plain weird. The kind of weird that nags at the back of your mind for years, even when you're sure it didn't mean anything. I'll tell it all as it happened, just like I lived it. The first one that comes to mind is the trip where my wife and I decided to camp in this dense patch of forest, mostly jack pine. It wasn't supposed to be anything special, just a night out under the stars, away from the noise of the town. We set up in a nice little clearing, tucked between the trees, and made camp. The sun had been out all day, and the weather report hadn't called for anything, so we weren't expecting much beyond a cool night. But as evening came on, the wind started to pick up. At first it was just a breeze, but before long it turned into this steady, relentless gust that kept pushing through the trees, making that hollow, moaning sound as it blew through the branches. I remember standing there, looking up at the tops of those jack pines, watching them sway. And then, as the light faded, the wind really started to howl. I mean, it wasn't just gusting anymore. It was roaring, like the whole forest had come alive and was angry about something. Branches started snapping off and crashing down all around us. Big ones. The kind that would kill you if you happened to be standing in the wrong spot. Trees were bending so far over I thought they'd just snap in half. And then some of them did. You'd hear this cracking sound, deep and sharp, and then this massive thud as a tree went down, shaking the ground. It was chaos. My wife and I grabbed what we could, our boots, the keys, our coats, and we ran for the car. I don't even know how we managed to dodge everything. Branches were coming down, trees were going over, and the wind was so loud we couldn't even hear each other. I kept looking back, half expecting to see a tree coming right for us. Somehow, we made it to the car without getting crushed. We just sat there, watching the storm tear through the forest, grateful that we were alive. We ended up sleeping in the car that night, parked at the edge of the clearing, listening to the wind rage on until morning. When the sun came up, we walked back to see what was left of our camp. It was a mess. One of the trees had come down right where our tent had been. If we'd stayed in there even a few minutes longer, we wouldn't have made it out. That trip taught me just how quickly things can change out there. You think you're prepared, but nature doesn't care. Then there was that time my best friend and I went out to this semi-remote camping area. The kind of place where you need a good 4x4 to get in. The road is rough, full of ruts and rocks, and by the time you get there, you know you're not likely to see many people. That's part of why we went, just to get away. The site itself wasn't much. A couple of old fire pits, some broken down picnic tables, and 2 outhouses that looked like they'd fall over in the next strong breeze. I doubt the park's folks came out there more than once a year to check on it. We rolled in late afternoon, set up camp, and were just getting settled when my buddy wandered over to the outhouses. I didn't think much of it until he came back looking a little puzzled. He told me I should go have a look at the first one. Figured maybe someone had trashed the place or something had died in there. But no, it wasn't anything like that. When I opened the door, I saw 3 big backpacks sitting there. I mean, these weren't little day packs. These were the kind of packs you'd load up for a week in the backcountry. They were clean, looked new, and just sitting there in the middle of this rotten old outhouse like someone had placed them carefully. Of course, we were curious. We unzipped them, half expecting something awful, but 2 of them were just full of normal camping gear. Good quality stuff, 2 stoves, sleeping bags, clothes, the works. But the third one was, well, it was just plain odd. It was packed full of Skittles. All kinds. Bulk bags, little bags, family packs, tropical, sour, regular, you name it. The whole bag was nothing but Skittles. No gear, no clothes, no food. Just Skittles. We waited. For days we camped there. Never saw a soul. No hikers, no trucks, no other campers. Those bags stayed right where we found them. It was like someone had just left them there and vanished. On the way out, we told the conservation officers about it when we hit town. They didn't have any answers either. To this day, I can't figure it out. Who hauls 3 big packs out there, leaves 2 full of gear and 1 full of candy, and never comes back? It didn't feel dangerous, but it sure felt strange. And the strangeness of it stuck with me. There was no reason for it. No explanation. Just 3 bags left in a place no one goes, like they were waiting for someone who never came. Another time, I took my dog out on a quick overnight. Just spur of the moment, nothing planned. I wasn't far off the road, just enough to feel like I was out there a bit. I didn't bother with a tent, just strung up a tarp for shelter and got a small fire going. I wasn't trying to be invisible, but I wasn't drawing attention either. It was a quiet night, or so I thought. I was starting to doze off, with the dog curled up next to me, when I heard it. A truck. I could hear it coming fast, tires crunching over gravel, engine revving. Then the voices, loud, drunk, shouting. They were close, closer than I liked. And then came the gunshots. At first I froze, heart pounding. The dog lifted his head, ears up, tense. I lay there listening, trying to figure out where they were. The shots echoed through the trees, and I couldn't tell for sure, but it felt like they were too close for comfort. I hadn't realized how near I'd set up to another road, one I hadn't seen on the map. I stayed low, packed up as fast as I could, keeping the dog close on a short leash. Every shot made me flinch, and I just kept moving, quiet as I could, away from the noise, away from the danger. I didn't want to take any chances. I hiked out to the car and left that place behind. Better safe than sorry. I didn't sleep much that night, even once I was back home. I think about that trip now and then, not because anything happened, but because of what could have happened. I wasn't scared of the woods. I was scared of the people in them. A bunch of drunk guys with guns who didn't know I was there. That's a recipe for disaster. And I've learned that you can't always count on maps or plans. The land can surprise you, and so can the people who cross it. Each of these trips reminded me that the wild isn't just about the animals, or the weather, or the land itself. It's about all of it together. And it's about us, the people who go out there thinking we're in control, when really, we're just visitors. Whether it's the storm that could have killed us, the strange packs left behind, or the careless danger of drunken shooters, the woods have a way of humbling you. They remind you to be alert, to respect where you are, and to know when to pack up and leave. I still camp. I still hike. But I'm always watching, always listening. I know now just how fast things can change. And I know that sometimes the scariest thing out there isn't the wild at all. It's what we bring with us. I had been out walking the bush for most of the morning, shotgun slung over my shoulder, boots crunching through dry leaves and twigs as I kept my eyes and ears open for any sign of upland birds. The air was cool and crisp, the kind of morning that reminds you why you bother to get up before dawn and head out into the wild. The sky was a pale blue overhead, streaked with thin clouds, and the smell of damp earth and pine was strong in the valley air. I had parked my truck about 3 miles back, on a dirt pull-off along a rough 2-track, and figured I'd cover as much ground as I could before the day got too warm and the birds hunkered down for good. I'd been moving quietly, stopping now and then to listen, to watch for a flicker of movement or a burst of feathers. The forest out here was a mix of tall pines and scattered scrub oak, the kind of place where quail or grouse might flush from cover if you were lucky. I'd seen a rabbit or two, a few squirrels, but no birds yet. After an hour or so, I decided to cut through a small valley, more of a shallow dip between 2 low ridges, to save time getting over to a stand of thicker brush where I'd had good luck before. The trail I followed was barely more than a game path, narrow and a bit overgrown, with patches of soft dirt where deer tracks and coyote prints crisscrossed in the dust. As I came around a bend in the trail, the kind where the brush crowds close and you can't see more than 20 feet ahead, I stopped dead in my tracks. There, standing right in the middle of the trail, not 30 yards in front of me, was a man. He had an AR-15 held at the ready position, not slung across his back or carried casually, but gripped with both hands, barrel pointed low but ready to come up in a flash. My heart skipped a beat, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, that deep, animal sense that tells you something is wrong, that you need to be careful, that this could go bad fast. The guy didn't move. He just stood there, watching me. His clothes were dirty and rumpled, like he'd been sleeping in them for days. A ragged flannel shirt, torn at one sleeve, stained jeans that hung loose on his thin frame, old boots scuffed and caked with mud. His hair was long and matted, greasy strands hanging around his face, and his beard was wild, patchy in places. His eyes, though, those were what stuck with me. They were wide and darting, red-rimmed, like he hadn't slept in a long time, like he was wired on something or just plain unhinged. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at me, the AR steady in his hands. I tried to stay calm. My heart was pounding in my chest, my mouth dry. I kept my shotgun pointed at the ground, hands loose at my sides, not wanting to give him any reason to feel threatened. I gave him a small nod, as friendly as I could manage, though inside I was already thinking about how to get out of there without setting him off. I said something simple, something to break the tension. I told him I was just out bird hunting, that I meant no harm. He stared at me for a long moment, like he was trying to decide what to do. Then he said in a flat, dry voice that he was hunting deer. The words hung in the air, and right away I knew that didn't make sense. It wasn't deer season, not even close. And even if it had been, an AR-15 wasn't legal for deer hunting around here. Besides, the guy wasn't dressed for hunting. No blaze orange, no pack, no sign of any gear except that rifle. He looked more like he'd been living out in the woods, surviving off who knows what. There was a long, awkward pause, and I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, one wrong word or move from going over. I glanced around, taking in the scene without turning my head. The trees crowding close on both sides, the narrow trail, no easy way to back out without turning my back on him. The air felt heavy, every sound of the forest suddenly sharper. A jay calling somewhere up the slope, the faint rustle of leaves in a breeze that didn't seem to reach down here. I asked him, as casual as I could, if he knew where I might find some birds, figuring maybe I could steer the conversation, find a way out. He just stared at me a second longer, then said I might have better luck back the way I came. His voice changed a little when he said it, sharper, like it wasn't a suggestion but a warning. I didn't argue. I didn't ask any more questions. I just nodded, muttered a thanks, and started backing away slow, careful to keep my hands where he could see them, careful not to turn my back until I had some distance between us. Once I got around the bend in the trail and out of sight, I picked up my pace, heart hammering, legs shaking as I moved as fast as I dared without breaking into a full-on run. Every few steps I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following, that rifle raised. But he didn't follow, or if he did, he stayed out of sight. I made my way back up the valley, back toward the ridge I'd come over, putting as much ground as I could between me and that encounter. My mind raced the whole way. What the hell was he doing out there? Why the AR? Why that look in his eyes? When I finally reached the top of the ridge and could see down toward where I'd parked, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The truck was still there, alone on the two-track, shining silver in the sun. I covered that last stretch quick, climbed in, and locked the doors. My hands trembled on the steering wheel as I sat there a minute, catching my breath, the adrenaline starting to ebb. The forest around me felt different now, less peaceful, like it was holding secrets just out of sight. I thought about driving straight into town and finding a deputy, but something about the whole thing made me hesitate. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe he really was just some drifter, harmless enough if left alone. But the more I thought about it, the more certain I felt that I'd stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. Maybe there was a meth lab back there, tucked away in the brush, or maybe he was hiding out for some other reason. Either way, it wasn't right. The next day, after a night of tossing and turning, replaying that encounter over and over, I did go into town and report it. I spoke with the sheriff's deputy at the office, told him where it had happened, what the man looked like, how he was armed. The deputy took notes, nodded, said they'd send someone out to have a look. I left feeling a little better, like I'd done my part, but I never heard anything more about it. No calls, no follow-up. Maybe they checked it out and found nothing. Maybe they decided it wasn't worth the trouble. Or maybe they knew, in a place like this, that there are corners of the wild better left undisturbed. I didn't go back to that part of the bush after that. Not that season, not since. There are plenty of other places to hunt, places where the only thing you have to worry about is the weather, or losing your way, or maybe running into a bear. Every so often, though, when I'm out in the quiet, miles from the nearest road, I think about that man, about the way he looked at me, about how easy it would have been for things to go bad that day. And I remind myself to listen to that voice inside, the one that tells you when it's time to leave, when it's time to walk away. That day I listened, and I'm glad I did. I don't usually share this story because every time I think about it, I get that strange tight feeling in my chest again, like I can't catch my breath. It's not something that's easy to explain either. Nothing obvious happened, no big event to point to, but it left this deep sense of unease that I've never really shaken off. It was a few years back, maybe 5 or 6. Some friends and I had planned a camping trip together. We had done this sort of thing a lot before, backpacking, car camping, sometimes just a quick overnight trip. It was supposed to be simple. A weekend away from everything, just us, the trees, and the quiet. There were 4 of us on that trip. Myself, my best friend who I'll call Sam, another friend named Kevin, and Kevin's girlfriend at the time, Lisa. We all got along well, and we'd camped together before without any problems. The plan was to head out early on a Friday, get to the campground by late afternoon, set up, and have the whole weekend to relax. We were aiming for this pretty popular spot not far from a small lake. It's not too deep into the woods, and there are usually a few other campers around, which can actually be kind of nice. The place is known for being peaceful, and we figured we could do some hiking, maybe a little fishing, and just enjoy some time away from work and everything else. But when we got there, the place was packed. Every single site was taken, which was surprising because it wasn't even a holiday weekend or anything. People had their tents and RVs crammed into every available space, and we could tell right away that it wasn't going to work. We didn't want to just set up right next to someone else and feel crowded the whole time. So after some debating, we decided we'd just find another spot. Kevin had this map of the forest, and he pointed out a more remote area several miles further down an old forest road. He said he'd been there once before, years ago, and remembered it being open and quiet. It wasn't an official campground, more like a clearing in the woods where people sometimes camped if they didn't mind roughing it a bit. No bathrooms, no fire pits, nothing but trees and open sky. So we drove out there. The road was rough, full of potholes and rocks that scraped the bottom of Kevin's old SUV more than once. Branches slapped against the sides of the car, and we had to stop a few times to move fallen limbs out of the way. It felt like we were really getting away from everything, which at the time seemed like a good thing. After about an hour of slow driving, we found the clearing. It was actually a nice spot. Fairly level ground, soft pine needles underfoot, and enough space to spread out the tents a little. We set up camp, built a small fire, and made dinner. The sun went down, the stars came out, and everything seemed normal. We talked and laughed, and eventually went to bed, tired from the long day. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up that first night, but I checked my watch and saw it was just after 2 in the morning. It wasn't the usual forest sounds that woke me. No rustling animals or the wind in the trees. It was something else entirely. Drumming and singing. At first, I thought I must be dreaming. The sound didn't seem to come from any one direction. It was like it was all around us at once, filling the air. The drumming was steady, a deep beat that echoed through the night. The singing was high and rhythmic, like chanting. I lay there frozen, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. We were miles from anyone else. There hadn't been any sign of other campers anywhere near us. And the music, it didn't sound like something you'd hear from someone just playing a radio or a speaker. It felt older somehow, raw and real in a way that's hard to describe. I tried to convince myself it had to be other campers, maybe somewhere deeper in the woods, though I didn't know how the sound could carry like that. But the feeling I had in my gut told me otherwise. It was that cold, sinking feeling you get when you know something isn't right. I could feel every hair on my arm standing up. After a few minutes, I heard movement outside the tent. Sam must have been awake too, because I felt him shift next to me. Without saying a word, we both unzipped the tent as quietly as we could and slipped out. Kevin and Lisa were already out, standing near the car, looking around with wide eyes. Nobody said anything. We didn't need to. We all felt it, the wrongness of the whole thing. We ended up piling into the SUV and sitting there the rest of the night. We didn't sleep. We just sat there, listening to the music that seemed to go on for hours, until eventually, just before dawn, it stopped as suddenly as it had started. When morning came, we got out and walked around, trying to find any sign of who or what could have made that noise. We walked through the trees, down little game trails, calling out a few times even though it felt kind of pointless. There was nothing. No campsites. No footprints. No trash or signs of a fire. Nothing that would suggest anyone else had been out there at all. The forest was as still and empty as it had been the day before. That day, we talked about what to do. We were all tired, but we didn't want to pack up just yet. We told ourselves it was probably nothing. Maybe sound carries weird in the woods. Maybe someone was camped miles away, and somehow the noise drifted over to us. It didn't feel right, but we didn't want to give up on the trip. So we stayed. That night we ate dinner, tried to relax, and went to bed early, hoping we'd sleep through the night. But we didn't. Again, just after 2, I woke up to that same drumming. The same singing. But this time it felt closer. Louder. The beat of the drum seemed to thump right through me, like I could feel it in my chest. The singing was clearer too. It sent a chill right through me, and I could feel that sense of dread rising again. I kept trying to tell myself it had to be people, that there was some normal explanation. But it didn't feel normal. It felt like we weren't supposed to be there. Like whatever was making that noise was angry we had come. None of us left the tent that night. We stayed inside, sitting up in our sleeping bags, wide awake, listening. The sound went on for hours again. I kept glancing at the tent walls, half expecting to see a shadow or shape pass by. But nothing ever did. Just the noise, filling the night, until dawn began to break, and it finally stopped. When the sun came up, we packed everything. None of us even talked much that morning. We just wanted to get out of there. The drive back to the main road felt even longer than the drive in. The forest seemed to press in on us from all sides. Every shadow and shape between the trees made my skin crawl. When we finally got back to the main campground, we were lucky enough to find a spot that had opened up. We set up there, surrounded by other campers, the sound of kids playing, radios, and people chatting. That night, I lay in the tent and waited, heart pounding, sure I'd hear the drumming again. But the night was quiet, just the normal sounds of the campground. And the next night too, nothing. The rest of the trip passed without incident. After we got home, we talked about it a little, but no one had any good explanations. Sam, who's Navajo, said the singing had reminded him of some of the songs and drumming from ceremonies he'd seen growing up. But he was just as confused as the rest of us. We hadn't been on tribal land, and even if we had, who would be out there in the middle of the night, miles from anywhere, singing and drumming like that? And why did it feel so wrong? I've thought about it a lot over the years. I've looked at maps, checked to see if maybe we were closer to someone's land than we realized, but nothing adds up. I guess in the end, the forest is a big place. There could have been people out there that we just didn't see. Maybe sound carries in strange ways at night. Maybe it was all just some weird coincidence. But I know what I felt. And what I felt was fear deep down, the kind of fear that tells you to get out, that you don't belong where you are. And I've never camped that deep into the forest again. I had moved out to that small cabin because I thought I needed peace, space to breathe, and somewhere I could work without distraction. The town was tiny, barely 200 people, one gas station, a post office, and a little store that doubled as a bait shop. The kind of place where folks kept to themselves, or so I thought. I figured that cabin, with its chipped red paint and sagging porch, was far enough from everything to give me what I wanted. It sat just off the highway, a stretch of cracked asphalt that rarely saw more than the odd pickup or logging truck rumbling by. Behind it, the woods spread out for miles, thick with pines and undergrowth, quiet except for birds and the wind. Most days were simple. I worked on my laptop, walked my dog along the edges of the trees, and kept to myself. The cabin wasn't much, but it was enough. 2 small bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like old wood, and a living room where I'd set up a cheap desk. It was just me and my dog, and for a while that was all I needed. The air felt clean, and the nights were so dark, and still you could hear the hum of your own thoughts. I remember the first time I heard the gunshots. I was walking my dog, maybe half a mile down the road from the cabin. The sound cracked through the quiet, 2 shots, quick, sharp. I stopped for a second, listened. Nothing else followed. My dog looked up at me, ears twitching, but there wasn't much to see. The woods swallowed sound, and out there, gunshots weren't so unusual. People hunted, or they shot at cans, or whatever folks out here did for fun. I didn't give it much more thought at the time. A couple of days later, I was out front, fixing one of the steps on the porch that had started to rot. That's when I saw the truck pull in. Old, rust creeping up from the wheel wells, paint sun-faded. It rolled up slow, dust rising behind it from the gravel drive. The driver was a man I'd never seen before, maybe in his 50s, scruffy, wearing a baseball cap that had seen better days. I didn't know anyone in that town, so him showing up felt off right from the start. He stopped and leaned out the window, waved me over. There was something in his eyes that didn't sit right with me. A kind of jumpy look, like he was sizing me up. But I walked over anyway, thinking maybe he was lost or needed something. He said he was my neighbor, though out here that could mean anything. The nearest house I knew of was a good half a mile away, hidden by the trees. He asked if I'd heard the gunshots the other day. I told him I had. He said it was his neighbor, taking shots at his house over some land dispute. The way he said it didn't feel right, like he was testing me. He didn't ask me anything else, didn't ask if I'd talked to anyone about it, just wanted to know if I'd heard. I said I had, and that was it. Then he noticed my dog, who'd been digging at a bare patch of ground near the porch. Out of nowhere, he got real interested in her. Stepped out of his truck and started calling to her, trying to get her to come over. My dog's friendly, but she kept her distance, and that seemed to frustrate him. He kept at it, and when she finally got close enough, he grabbed at her, flipped her over on her back, like he was trying to show dominance or something. She yelped, squirmed, and I told him to knock it off. It rattled me, the way he handled her, like he thought he had some kind of right to do it. Then he asked if I had any guns. I told him no without thinking. He nodded, like he was filing that away in his head. Said he was good with dogs, a great trainer. Then he asked if I'd come mow his lawn. Said, "Please ensure you bring / my dog's name." The way he said it gave me a chill, like it wasn't a request but something else. Something that didn't make sense. He left not long after, but I couldn't shake the bad feeling. I told this guy I was unarmed, out here in the middle of nowhere, no one close enough to hear if something went wrong. And how did I know he was telling the truth about those shots? Maybe he was the one who'd fired them. Maybe he was checking who might have heard. I sat on that porch for a long time after he drove off, staring down the road where his truck had gone. thinking how easy it would be for someone like him to come back when he felt like it. Over the next few days, he started showing up more. Calling, texting, wanting to know why I hadn't come over, why I hadn't brought my dog. I'd given him my number, trying to be polite at first, before I realized just how off he was. He was pushy, insistent, wouldn't take no for an answer. I started keeping my dog inside more, started locking the doors even during the day. I barely slept, lying awake at night listening for any sound. The woods that had felt so peaceful started to feel like they were closing in. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of the wind set me on edge. I went to the store in town, hoping maybe to get some advice, or at least warn someone about this guy. The folks there didn't seem surprised when I mentioned him. Told me he'd lost everything: job, wife, respect. Drank too much, had a temper. Nobody trusted him. Nobody liked him. They said he had nothing left to lose, and that scared me more than anything. A man like that, with nothing to lose, could do anything. The nights got worse. I'd sit up, all the lights off, bare spray and a knife on the table beside me listening. There were too many ways someone could come up to that cabin without me seeing. Too many angles, too much cover in the trees. I kept thinking about how I'd told him I had no guns. How easy it would be for him to just walk out of the woods one night, shotgun in hand, and I'd have no chance. I barely ate. Couldn't focus on work. I was just waiting, listening, every sound like a warning. Then one night it happened. My dog started growling, low at first, then louder. I froze. The cabin was so quiet I could hear my own breathing, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't hear anything else, but that didn't matter. She heard something. She smelled something. I grabbed the knife and the bear spray and slipped into the bathroom, the only room without windows. Locked the door. I sat on the floor, back against the tub, hand clenched so tight around that spray my fingers went numb. I stayed like that for hours, listening. Every creak of the cabin felt like footsteps. Every gust of wind felt like someone brushing against the walls. At some point I must have dozed off, because I woke with the first light of morning seeping in under the door, cramped and sore, still clutching that can. I didn't go out right away. I stayed in there until the sun was well up, until I felt like I could move without my legs giving out. When I finally stepped outside, everything looked the same. The same trees, the same empty stretch of highway. But it didn't feel the same. I felt watched, like the woods were holding their breath. I knew I couldn't stay. It wasn't safe, and I couldn't take another night like that. I tried to stick it out a little longer, hoping maybe I was overreacting. But then the landlords started acting strange too. They had dogs of their own, but I'd catch them watching mine, feeding her treats when they thought I wasn't looking. Heard them talking about how they wanted her, how they were going to make her choose them over me. It was too much. The whole place felt poisoned. I couldn't trust anyone. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't think straight. Every day felt like I was waiting for something awful to happen. One morning, they went off to the market, like they did every week. I didn't waste a second. I packed everything I could into my van. Didn't matter that it wasn't insured. Didn't matter that I didn't have a license. I got my dog in the passenger seat, slammed the doors, and I drove. I didn't stop to say goodbye, didn't look back. I just drove until that town was a dot in the rear view, until the woods thinned and the highway opened up ahead of me like a promise. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed. I don't want to know. All I know is I left, and I didn't go back. I found somewhere else, somewhere quiet, but not so isolated. Somewhere I could breathe again. And at night, when it gets real still, I still listen for sounds outside. But they're just sounds now. And I've got my dog by my side, and that's enough. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, my mom, grandma, my brothers, and I went camping at this small campground about 2 hours away from our town. We used to go there a lot, and over the years we had kind of made this one campsite our own. Every time we visited, we'd add something small, like we cleared out rocks to make a smoother spot for the tents, or we set up logs to sit on around the fire pit. It always felt familiar, like a second home in the woods. I remember the smell of the pine trees, the way the dirt felt soft under my shoes, and how at night the stars were so bright, brighter than anything I'd ever see back home. This place was peaceful, or at least it had always felt that way before this trip. This particular trip was different right from the start, because we had my aunt and uncle's dogs with us. They were both bird dogs, well-trained, calm, and friendly. Their names were Star and Ariel. Star was bigger and older, mostly white with brown patches, while Ariel was smaller and faster, with dark spots and sharp, alert eyes. My aunt and uncle were off on military tours, so my mom agreed to take care of their dogs, and this trip seemed like the perfect chance to give them a little adventure too. The dogs loved it out there at first, tails wagging, sniffing every tree and bush, always staying close to us. I liked having them around, made me feel safer somehow. We set up camp like we always did. The tent went up in its usual spot, not too far from the fire pit. My mom and grandma worked together, and my brothers and I tried to help, but mostly we just ended up playing around. The dogs trotted between us, checking things out, but always staying calm. We got the fire going as the sun went down, and I remember sitting there watching the flames while the sky darkened, the air cooling as night came on. We ate, talked, and eventually, after a long day, we all settled down for the night. I crawled into my sleeping bag feeling safe and tired, with the soft sounds of the forest outside and the quiet breathing of my family around me in the tent. It must have been around 1 in the morning when it happened. I woke up because I felt Star shift beside me. The dogs had both come inside the tent with us, and I remember thinking it was nice having them there. But now Star was up, stiff, and growling low in his throat. It was this deep, steady rumble that made my skin prickle even before I really understood what was going on. I lay there frozen for a second, listening. Ariel was up too, tense and quiet, ears forward. My heart started pounding, not because I knew what was out there, but because of the way the dogs were acting. They weren't playing, they weren't curious, they were serious. I'd never seen them like that. My mom sat up quickly. She always took charge in situations like this, and I could see even in the dim light that she was wide awake now, alert. She grabbed the small camp axe we kept by the tent flap and unzipped it just enough to peek out. The cold air rushed in, and I felt more awake, every sound sharper. The dogs were at the flap before she could even step out, pushing forward, but at the same time trying to block her, keeping themselves between her and whatever was out there. Star was growling louder now, his hackles up, teeth bared. Ariel was quieter but just as ready, crouched low, muscles tight like a coiled spring. My mom stepped out, and the dogs moved with her, staying ahead of her but not letting her go far. That's when it got really strange. As she tried to move toward the far edge of the campsite, the part that sloped down towards the woods, the dogs wouldn't let her. They kept positioning themselves in front of her, pushing her back, herding her toward the car like they had decided that was the only safe place. It was like they knew something was wrong in a way none of us could see or hear. Their focus was locked on that dark edge of the camp, and they weren't taking any chances. Inside the tent, we were all awake by now. My brothers were scared. I could hear it in the way they breathed, fast and shaky. My grandma was trying to keep us calm, but even she sounded nervous. I kept peeking out the tent flap, watching my mom and the dogs. The night felt heavy, the kind of quiet that makes every little noise seem louder. The breeze moved through the trees, and the fire had died down to low, glowing coals. Then, just like that, my mom made the decision that would stick with me for the rest of my life. She didn't wait to figure out what the dogs were sensing. She came back, grabbed us, and told us to pack up. We didn't argue. We moved fast, stuffing sleeping bags into the car, leaving behind the stuff that didn't matter. The dogs jumped in last, both still on edge, ears perked, heads low, growling softly. My mom started the car, and we pulled out of the campsite without looking back. The whole way down that dirt road, the headlights cutting through the darkness, my stomach was tight with fear. About 10 minutes from camp, that's when we noticed it. A pair of headlights in the rearview mirror, a car coming up behind us. At first, we didn't think much of it. Maybe just another camper leaving late. But it didn't feel right. The car kept its distance but matched our speed. The dogs were in the back, both still growling, heads low, eyes fixed on the back window like they could sense the danger even if we couldn't see it clearly. My mom kept driving, focused on the road, but I could tell she was scared. We all were. My brothers were crying quietly, too afraid to speak. The road back to town was long and winding, and the car behind us never tried to pass, never fell back too far. It just stayed there, like it was waiting. I kept turning around in my seat to look, hoping I was just imagining it, but it was always there, headlights glaring, keeping pace. I made up stories in my head, like maybe they were scared too. Maybe they just wanted to stay close to another car on this dark road. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. The dogs knew too. They never stopped growling. Finally, after what felt like forever, the lights of town came into view. To get into town, You had to cross this big bridge that spanned the river. I remember thinking that once we were across, we'd be safe. As we started over the bridge, I looked back one more time. The car that had been following us so closely stopped. Just like that. It didn't follow us onto the bridge. It sat there for a second, then turned around and sped back the way we came, disappearing into the night. We didn't stop until we pulled into a gas station on the edge of town. My mom got out to go inside, probably to buy cigarettes or just to catch her breath. But when she came back, something happened that made it all feel even more real. Star wouldn't let her back into the car at first. He stood there, blocking the door, staring at her, his body tense. It was like he needed to be sure, like he had to see her face clearly and know it was really her. Only when he was satisfied did he step back and let her in. Even then, both dogs stayed alert, watching the dark, their bodies still on edge. We sat there for a long time before anyone said anything. The relief of being in town didn't wash away the fear right away. I kept thinking about what would have happened if we hadn't left when we did, if my mom hadn't trusted the dogs, if that car had caught up to us. It was one of those nights that sticks with you, that changes the way you see things. After that, camping never felt the same. We went on one more trip a few years later, but I never enjoyed it like I used to. I couldn't relax, couldn't stop thinking about that night. The way the dogs had known something we didn't. The way danger can come out of nowhere when you least expect it. And to this day, I haven't been camping again. I don't think I ever will. I lived right on the edge of a state park when I was a kid, one of those parks that sits so close to the city that it barely feels wild. It was one of those places where, no matter what time of day you went out, you'd pass at least a dozen people in the first few minutes. Joggers with their headphones in, parents with kids in strollers, groups of teenagers cutting across the trails to get to who knows where. There was a steady hum of human presence, the kind that made the woods feel smaller, like they'd been tamed somehow. I'd heard adults say it was overhyped, and I didn't understand what they meant until I started paying attention to what wasn't there. By the time I was 10, I'd walked those trails so many times I could probably draw a map of them with my eyes closed. I knew every bend where tree roots snaked across the dirt like ropes, every stretch where the gravel got loose and slippery. But more than anything, I noticed what I didn't see: animals. Sure, there were birds, always birds, and the occasional squirrel darting up a tree trunk, but that was about it. The park had been picked clean of anything bigger. People talk sometimes about rattlesnakes, but in all those years, I never saw one. And every now and then, someone would claim they'd spotted a wild pig rooting around near the creek beds, but it was always a friend of a friend kind of story, never firsthand. That day with my dad started like a lot of our weekend hikes. It was cooler than usual, early fall, the kind of morning where the air feels crisp and smells like dry leaves. My dad liked to take what he called the quieter paths, which basically meant the ones that weren't paved and didn't allow bikes. It made things a little tougher on me, since I had to watch where I put my feet, but I didn't mind. I liked feeling like we were explorers or something, even if we were just a few miles from home. We'd been walking for maybe half an hour when it happened. I was focused on the ground, stepping over roots, and watching for any sign of a rattlesnake, like my dad always warned me to. Then out of nowhere, my dad swore under his breath. It was enough to make me look up, and that's when I saw them. 2 bucks. Not just any deer. These were huge, at least to my 10-year-old eyes. Their antlers looked like something out of a nature show, wide and branching like the bare trees around us. And they were close. Closer than I'd ever seen deer before, maybe 20 feet away, just standing there staring at us like they'd been waiting. I didn't feel scared. I felt excited. It was the first time I'd seen anything like that in person. "Oh dear," I said, loud enough to make my dad wince. Before I could think twice, I took a step toward them. My dad's voice shot out, sharper than I'd ever heard it. But I wasn't listening. I thought maybe they'd let me pet them. One of the bucks lowered its head a little, and I thought that meant it was friendly, like a dog getting ready for a scratch behind the ears. It wasn't until years later that I understood how stupid that was. The buck wasn't being friendly. It was sizing me up. My dad must have known it too, because the next thing I remember was a branch flying through the air and smacking the buck right across the face. It didn't even flinch. The other deer bolted at the first sign of movement, but this one just stood there, like it was daring us to try again. Finally, after what felt like forever, it turned and trotted off into the brush, calm as could be. My dad was shaking, and I felt like I'd just done something amazing instead of something incredibly dumb. That was the first time I really got it, that even the animals that look peaceful can be dangerous if you don't respect them. After that, I started paying more attention on our hikes. I wasn't scared exactly, but I was more aware. I noticed more things like broken branches where something heavy had passed, or the way the birds went silent sometimes, and you couldn't quite figure out why. That fall, there was a buzz around the park about a mountain lion sighting. It had been seen from one of the busier trails, way up on a ridge, but close enough for people to get a good look before it slipped away. It was the first confirmed sighting in decades. I remember standing in our backyard that night, staring out at the dark line of trees at the edge of the park, and wondering if the lion was out there watching us. The idea of it made me feel small, but not in a bad way. It felt like the park was waking up somehow, like all those animals that had been pushed out were starting to come back. Over the years, I watched it happen. Little by little, things changed. The deer stopped being a rare sight. By the time I was in high school, they were practically regular visitors. I'd see them jumping over our back fence to nibble at my mom's roses, or standing at the edge of the yard like they owned the place. I started hearing owls at night, too, loud enough that I could hear them through my bedroom window. Once, I found a feather from one of them on the ground near the parking lot at the park's entrance. It felt like a gift. The rumors about wild pigs stopped being rumors. I saw them myself, usually early in the morning when the park was still quiet. They'd root around near the creeks, snorting and grunting, their coarse hair bristling in the dawn light. I learned to keep my distance. They weren't aggressive unless you got too close, but they weren't afraid of people either. And then there were the mountain lions. I never saw one up close, but I heard them. If you've never heard a mountain lion scream, it's not something you forget. The sound carries through the night, eerie and high-pitched, like a woman crying out in pain. The first time I heard it, I lay in bed, heart pounding, listening to it echo through the hills. It didn't happen often, but when it did, it reminded me that the park wasn't ours, not really. As for the rattlesnakes, they stayed the same. They didn't want trouble. If you left them alone, they left you alone. I'd see them sometimes, stretched out on the trails soaking up the sun, and I'd give them a wide berth. That's all they asked for. One night, not long after I'd moved back home after college, I was out in the backyard again. It was late, and the air had that cool, damp feel that means morning isn't far off. I was just standing there, looking out at the park, when I heard it, the scream of a mountain lion, closer than I'd ever heard it before. It sounded like it was right on the other side of the fence. For a second, I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring into the dark, trying to see something, anything. Then I heard it again, further off this time, fading into the distance. I didn't go back inside right away. I stayed there, listening to the quiet that followed, feeling the weight of the night settle back over everything. And I realized something. The park hadn't changed. It had always been wild, under the surface. We'd just forgotten for a while. The animals had been waiting patient until we gave them a reason to come back. That was the last time I felt truly uneasy in my own backyard. After that night, I made peace with it. The deer, the pigs, the owls, the lions, they belonged there as much as I did, maybe more. And every time I heard an owl call, or saw a buck standing proud in the early morning light, I felt lucky. Lucky to be reminded that no matter how many trails we carve through the woods, no matter how many people pass by every day, the wild is always there, just waiting for its chance. I went camping with a very large group a few years ago. There were probably about 45 of us, all friends or friends of friends, and it was supposed to be a fun weekend away from work and city life. We picked a campground that was popular that time of year, not too far from home, but far enough that it felt like we had escaped into nature. We arrived late in the afternoon, and by the time I and the two girls I planned to share a tent with pulled up, the main campground was already packed. Tents were everywhere, campfires were crackling, and you could hear people laughing, music playing low from someone's radio, and the general buzz of a lot of people settling in for the night. It wasn't a big deal. Across the road from the main site, there were some more open spots near the river. It wasn't as well lit, and it felt a bit more isolated, but at the time we didn't think much of it. In fact, it felt nice to have a little distance from the bigger crowd. We picked a flat area not too far from the river's edge and set up our tent. We could still hear the chatter and noise from the main group across the road, but it was far enough away that it was muffled, almost like background noise. That first night was fine. We cooked some food on a small portable stove, sat around for a while watching the stars come out, and eventually crawled into our sleeping bags, tired from the day. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, the sound of the river running nearby, the occasional breeze moving through the trees. I slept like a rock that night. The next day went by like most camping trips do. We hiked a little in the morning, came back for lunch, spent the afternoon down by the river with some of the others who wandered over from the main site. People fished, talked, had a few drinks, and it was the kind of day that makes you feel relaxed in a way you don't usually get to feel. As night fell, the temperature dropped a bit, but nothing too uncomfortable. We ate, cleaned up, and eventually crawled into our tent again. I don't know what time it was when I woke up. It was still pitch dark, and I didn't have my phone right next to me to check the time. What woke me was a noise. At first it was soft, like something brushing against the side of the tent. My first half-awake thought was that it was the wind, maybe a branch or something. But as I lay there listening, I realized it wasn't the wind. There were footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving around outside the tent. My heart started pounding right away. I lay still, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The steps were light, but there was more than one set of them. And then I heard it, this low, guttural growl that made every hair on my body stand on end. I've heard enough about wildlife to recognize that sound. At least, I thought I did in that moment. It sounded like a cougar. Not loud and roaring or anything dramatic, just that deep, threatening rumble that lets you know something dangerous is near. I felt paralyzed. My mind raced through what I had with me. No gun. My knife was in the car. I was completely defenseless. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast, as I tried to stay quiet and think of what to do. One of the girls was asleep close to me. The other was on the far side of the tent. I didn't want to wake her because I honestly thought she might panic, and that would just make everything worse. Carefully, as quietly as I could, I nudged the girl closest to me. I felt her stir, and I could tell when she realized something was wrong because she tensed up immediately. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't anything to say. We just sat there, frozen, listening to whatever was outside the tent. The growling came again. It felt like it was right next to us, like whatever it was could tear through the thin fabric between us if it wanted to. The footsteps kept circling the tent, slow and steady, sometimes stopping for a few seconds like they were listening for us, then starting up again. My mind kept flashing to headlines, stories I'd heard, warnings about camping in cougar territory. I kept imagining how fast one could move, how we wouldn't stand a chance if it decided to attack. I felt so stupid for not having my knife. I felt stupid for camping there at all. I kept my body tensed, ready to do something, anything, if it came to that. Minutes passed, or maybe it was longer. Time felt strange in that moment. Every sound was amplified in the darkness. I could hear the river, I could hear my friends breathing, I could hear twigs snapping under whatever was out there. My muscles started to ache from sitting so rigid, but I didn't dare move. At one point I thought I heard what sounded like two of them communicating. Another low sound, like a growl but different, maybe a warning or a signal. I imagined a pair of hungry cougars sizing us up, deciding if it was worth the effort to try and break into the tent. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, barely even breathing, waiting. I thought about my family. I thought about how nobody across the road could probably hear us if we screamed. I thought about how helpless we were. The noises went on, the circling, the low sounds, and then eventually, finally, they started to move away. The footsteps grew softer. The growls stopped. I strained my ears, not daring to believe it at first, but the sounds kept fading until there was nothing left but the river and the breeze. I didn't sleep at all after that. I don't think my friend did either. We sat there, too scared to even lie back down, just waiting for the sky to start to lighten. Every little noise made me jump. The creak of the tent fabric, the rustling of leaves, even the sound of the water felt louder and more menacing somehow. When dawn finally broke, I felt this huge wave of relief, but I was still shaky and exhausted. We stepped outside, and it felt strange to see the world looking so normal. The trees, the river, everything bathed in soft morning light. It wasn't until later, when we made our way back across the road to the main group, that we found out the truth. Some of the guys from the other campsite thought it would be funny to sneak over in the middle of the night and mess with us. They made the animal noises. They crept around our tent. They thought it was a harmless joke. We were all in our 30s, grown adults, and they thought it would be funny to scare the hell out of us like that. I wasn't mad exactly, at least not in the way you might think. I didn't yell or make a scene. I just felt drained. They didn't understand what it felt like to sit there for hours, convinced you might die, convinced a wild animal was about to tear through the tent at any second. They didn't understand how real it felt in the dark, how the mind fills in the blanks with the worst possibilities. I laughed along with the group when they told the story, because what else could I do? But inside, I knew I was done. That was the last time I went camping. I couldn't shake the feeling, couldn't stop remembering the terror of that night, the helplessness, the cold sweat, the racing heart. Every now and then I think about it, usually when someone invites me on a camping trip or talks about how peaceful it is to sleep out in the woods. I just smile and say it's not really my thing anymore. And I remember sitting in that tent, in the dark, listening to those sounds, waiting for something to happen, and knowing there was nothing I could do about it. It had been over 10 years since I'd last gone camping, really camping, alone out in the mountains. When I was a kid, it was a regular thing. Those long summer days spent wandering trails, sleeping under the stars, waking up with the dawn light filtering through tall pines. But life got in the way. I moved to the city for work, far from the woods I loved. After all those years, the thought of getting back out there, back into the wild, had been growing stronger. So I made a plan. Just me, my truck, and the forest. No distractions, no phone service, just the sound of the wind in the trees and the smell of pine needles in the air. It took longer to get to my destination than I expected. I hadn't accounted for the traffic, or the construction along the highway, or all the little stops I made along the way for gas, for food, for one last bit of cell service to let people know I'd be out of touch for a while. By the time I turned off the main road and onto the dirt backroads of the national forest, the sun was already dipping low, the sky turning that soft, fading gold that only happens at the end of a long day. I hadn't even made it to the spot I'd picked out on the map. I didn't want to keep driving in the dark, though. These forest roads can be tricky at night, and I didn't want to risk a flat tire or worse. So when I found a wide pull-off near a small creek, I decided that was it for the night. The air was cooling fast, that dry mountain chill that seeps into your clothes once the sun's gone. I parked the truck, got out, stretched my legs, and took a deep breath. It smelled like home. The pine, the dust, the faint scent of water from the creek. I felt good. Tired, but good. I decided to sleep in the truck rather than setting up a tent. I'd brought an air mattress that fit in the back of the cab and my old sleeping bag. Less fuss that way, and I figured I'd hit the road early in the morning. As I started getting my bedding set up, I noticed something. It was quiet. Now, I know the woods can be quiet sometimes, especially at dusk. Animals bed down, birds settle for the night. But this was different. It was too quiet. Not a single chirp, no rustle in the underbrush, no splash from the creek. I paused, listening. The only sound was my own breathing, my own movements. I tried to brush it off. Maybe I was just out of practice, too used to city noise. I kept working, unrolling the sleeping bag, inflating the mattress. The truck creaked a little as I shifted things around. Then I heard it, the sharp, grating call of a Steller's jay. It made me jump because it was sudden, breaking that heavy silence. I froze, listening again. The jay's alarm call echoed through the trees. Anyone who's spent time in the woods knows that sound. Jays, crows, ravens, they don't call like that for no reason. That's a predator alarm. My eyes scanned the trees, heart beating faster. The light was fading fast, the trees casting long shadows that blurred together. And then I saw it, a shape moving between two trees, maybe 30 yards out. I could only see the top of its hindquarters through the brush and the trunks. Tawny, smooth, powerful. My first thought was deer, out of habit. But the color wasn't right. The size wasn't right. And more than that, there was no sound. The ground out here was covered in layers of fallen leaves, pine needles, little twigs. I knew from years of experience that a deer, even moving carefully, would crunch through all that. But this animal moved like a shadow, silent, purposeful. That's when my stomach dropped. Only a predator moves like that. A mountain lion. The thought came to me clear and cold. My mouth felt dry. I stayed as still as I could, watching, waiting. The animal kept moving, slow, steady, like it had all the time in the world. From the direction it was going, I figured it would have to cross the creek soon. If it did, I'd get a clearer look. but I never saw it cross. It just seemed to melt into the trees, gone as smoothly as it had appeared. That's when I started to feel it, that prickling on the back of your neck, that crawling sense that you're not alone, that something is watching you. My hands didn't feel steady anymore. I worked faster, stuffing the sleeping bag and air mattress into the back of the cab. My mind kept going over what I'd seen, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself it was just passing through, that it wasn't interested in me. But the feeling wouldn't go away. Every few seconds I'd glance at the trees, half expecting to see those pale eyes watching from the shadows. I hurried up, trying not to let the fear take over. I got everything set up, climbed in, and slammed the tailgate down as hard as I could. The sound cracked through the quiet, loud and sharp. And then I heard it. 3 big bounds, heavy, powerful, crashing through the underbrush. Then silence again. The mountain lion had been close, closer than I'd realized, and my noise had startled it. But it didn't run far. It stopped. I could feel it out there, just beyond where I could see, waiting, listening. I got in the truck, locked the doors, rolled up the windows. My heart was racing. Inside, I felt a little safer. The cab of the truck felt like a thin shell between me and the dark woods. I didn't dare turn on a light. I just sat there listening, straining to hear any sound over the pounding of my pulse in my ears. The minutes dragged on. The night deepened. Every so often, I thought I heard something, a faint rustle, a crack of a branch, but it was hard to tell if it was real or just my mind playing tricks. The stars came out, bright and cold above the black silhouettes of the trees. The creek kept on flowing, steady, the only constant in that still, watchful night. I didn't sleep. I lay there in my bag, fully clothed, boots on, listening, waiting. I kept telling myself that mountain lions don't want trouble. They don't want to mess with people. I knew that. I'd heard it 100 times. But knowing it and feeling safe were two different things in that moment. Sometime in the night, maybe a few hours before dawn, I felt myself start to relax, just a little. The sounds of the woods came back slowly. A night bird calling. The soft scurry of something small in the underbrush. The normal sounds that let you know the world is still turning, that the danger has passed, or at least moved on. When the sky started to lighten, I finally climbed out of the truck. The air was cold, the ground damp with dew. I stretched, every muscle stiff from lying tense for so long. I walked to the creek, splashed some water on my face, looked around. No sign of the mountain lion. Just the quiet, peaceful forest, bathed in soft morning light. I made coffee on my small stove, hands still a little shaky, and sat on the tailgate, watching the sun rise. The fear had faded, but the memory of it stayed sharp. I'd spent years in the woods, seen bears, heard wolves, but nothing had ever made me feel quite like that. That mix of awe and terror, knowing I'd shared the night with something so powerful, so silent, so near. I packed up slowly, taking my time now that the daylight was back. I didn't rush. I felt a kind of respect, a reminder of my place out there. The forest isn't mine. I'm just a guest. And even after all that, even with the fear still fresh in my mind, I knew I'd be back. That's the thing about the wild. It scares you, sure, but it calls you back every time. Camping was something my family did every summer, like clockwork. We weren't rich or anything, and we didn't do big overseas trips or theme parks. Our vacations were always in a tent, on some plot of dirt surrounded by trees or sand. We rotated between a few familiar places, Virginia Beach, Westmoreland, and Assateague Island. Westmoreland was my least favorite. The mosquitoes were relentless, the lake always smelled weird, and the place had this heavy, stagnant air that made everything feel kind of off. Virginia Beach was fun but crowded. Assateague, though, that was the one that stuck with me the most. That place had a personality. Assateague is a barrier island off the coast of Maryland and Virginia, famous for its wild ponies. They're everywhere. You see them grazing on dune grass, trotting along the sand like they own the place. And honestly, they kind of do. When you camp there, you're not just setting up next to some scenic beach. You're parking your tent in the territory of animals that don't really care that humans are around. They don't run away from you. They stare at you. They steal your food. And they don't keep to daylight hours. I was maybe 8 or 9 during the trip that burned itself into my memory. We had set up camp near the beach. There were 5 of us, my mom and dad, my older sister, my younger brother, and me. We had 2 tents, one larger family style, one where my parents and little brother slept, and a smaller dome tent that my sister and I shared. We weren't that far apart, maybe 20 feet, but at night in the dark, that gap can feel like a mile. It gets so quiet out there, too. No cars, no city lights, just the whisper of waves and the occasional call of some bird you can't see. That evening had been normal. We cooked hot dogs over the fire, dug a little pit to roast marshmallows, and buried our feet in the cold sand as the sky turned orange and then purple. The wind picked up a bit, carrying the smell of salt and something earthy, maybe seaweed. We were told not to leave food out. The park rangers were clear about that. Anything with a scent went into the car or into the bear box. It wasn't bears we were avoiding, though. It was the ponies. They were strong enough to rip open a tent if they smelled something good inside, and they weren't shy. We were careful. At least I think we were. I don't remember anything being left out. After everything was packed up, we said our goodnights. My sister and I crawled into our tent and zipped ourselves in. I lay there for a while listening to the breeze flutter the rainfly. My sister fell asleep fast, as always. I stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows shift as the moon climbed higher. It must have been around midnight when I woke up to the sound of my mom sitting bolt upright. The strange part was that I didn't hear her get up. She didn't rustle around or shift. It was like my eyes opened and she was already sitting straight, back stiff, arms planted at her sides. I could barely make out her outline through the thin nylon of the tent. She wasn't moving, just staring. That stillness scared me more than if she had screamed. At first, I thought she might be sick or sleepwalking, but then I noticed where her head was angled. She was looking toward the side of the tent that faced ours. I turned my head in that direction and squinted through the mesh window. At first, I thought it was a person. There was something standing outside our tent, right on the edge of the moonlight. The silhouette was just a little darker than everything else, but you could make it out. It looked like a hunched figure, bent over slightly, with long wiry hair that drooped past its shoulders. It wasn't moving, just staring. I couldn't see eyes, but I felt them. I remember my body locking up. I stopped breathing for a second. My first thought was that some old woman had wandered into our campsite, which didn't make sense, but that's what my brain gave me. The figure was too thin, too slouched, and the hair too stringy to be anything else. And then I started thinking maybe it was someone from a nearby site playing a prank. But who would do that in the middle of the night, in a dark campsite, to strangers? I felt my skin crawling. I couldn't look away, but I didn't want to keep looking either. My mind was trying to solve it, trying to assign a label to what I was seeing, but none of the usual ones made sense. The figure stepped closer. Not a big step, just a shift of weight, a lean forward. But it was enough to make a tiny creak in the brush. And that creak snapped something inside me. I jerked in my sleeping bag. It was instinct. I didn't plan it. The noise I made was small, maybe just a gasp or the soft rustle of nylon. But it was enough. The figure recoiled. Fast. And for the first time, I heard the sound it made as it turned to flee. Not the padded steps of a person, not shoes on dirt, but the clumsy, muffled thuds of hooves. It wasn't a person at all. It was one of the ponies. The shape, the hair, even the weird, slumped appearance. It all made sense in an instant. The moonlight had caught it just right, distorting its body into something humanoid. What I thought was hair was its mane. The bend in its shape was its head lowered toward the tent. It had probably smelled something. Maybe something small got left behind, a candy wrapper or a bit of marshmallow. Whatever it was, it had drawn the pony close. As it ran, I heard it barrel past our tent and down the trail that led toward the beach. Another pair of hooves followed it. I guess a second pony had been nearby the whole time, maybe farther back in the shadows. Their hooves pounded the sand and then faded away into the rhythm of the waves. It took a long time for my heart to calm down. The silence afterward felt thick. I lay there, still as a stone, waiting for something else to happen. My sister never woke up. My mom eventually shifted back down into her sleeping bag. She didn't say anything. No sound. I wondered if maybe she had stayed frozen for so long because she was trying to figure it out too. Trying to decide if it was a threat or just something weird. Maybe she knew sooner than I did. Maybe not. I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. In the morning, everything looked normal again. Blue skies, sunlight on the sand, birds darting around looking for crumbs. My dad was already up, boiling water for coffee. My brother was running around barefoot, chasing gulls. No one mentioned the pony, but I checked. I walked the trail behind our tent and found the prints in the sand. Hoof marks. 2 sets. They came right up to the edge of our tent and then veered away down toward the dunes. No human footprints. No old woman. Just the ponies. Later that day, I saw one of them again. A big brown mare with a white blaze on her forehead. She was standing near the picnic area, her eyes half-lidded like she was bored. But I recognized the way she looked at people. Not like a wild animal, not exactly. More like she was watching us the way we might watch a TV show. With curiosity, but from a distance. Like we were something to be tolerated, not feared. That image of the pony standing in the moonlight, its mane hanging like an old woman's hair, stayed with me for a long time. For years, I couldn't sleep in a tent without picturing it. Not because it was dangerous. It wasn't. It hadn't tried to hurt anyone. But because of how my brain had filled in the blanks before I had all the facts. How easily the mind can turn a pony into a ghost. We went back to Assateague again a few years later. Different site, farther from the pony trails. But I never forgot that night. It taught me that fear isn't always about what something is. Sometimes, it's about what you think it is, in that split second before reason kicks in. And those few seconds of confusion can be the scariest moments of your life. Not because something's out to get you, but because for just a moment you believe it is. We had all been looking forward to that long weekend for months. It was rare that our school schedules lined up so perfectly for 5 whole days off, and we weren't going to waste it sitting around town. The plan was simple: pack up our gear, hike deep into the North Georgia mountains, and camp out for the whole weekend. Just us, nature, and the quiet. That's what we thought, anyway. There were 5 of us, me, my buddy who I'll just call Jay, and 3 girls we were close with. Jay had been in the Army, and he and I had plenty of experience outdoors. We weren't amateurs when it came to camping, and we took the planning seriously. We packed Jay's truck with everything we thought we'd need. A huge 10-person tent, fold-up cots, sleeping bags, a propane stove and grill, coolers full of food and beer, a portable shower, even some small solar chargers for our phones. It wasn't just a quick overnight trip. We were ready to be out there for the long haul. We left on Wednesday afternoon. The drive out was full of excitement. The girls were laughing, playing music loud enough to make our ears ring, and snapping photos. Jay and I were double-checking the map, making sure we knew the best place to park and head in. We reached this small town, barely more than a few buildings strung along a 2-lane road. We parked the truck in a little lot at the edge of town, shouldered our packs, and started the hike in. The first few miles were great. The weather was perfect, not too hot, not too cold. The air smelled like pine and fresh dirt, and the trail was clear and easy to follow. We talked, joked, and took breaks to drink water and enjoy the views. Around the 4th or 5th mile, we came across this clearing. It was like something out of a painting, a big open space with a pond, or maybe it was a small lake. The water was still, almost too still. That's when I noticed it. Everything had gone quiet. Not just us stopping our chatter, but the whole forest. No birds, no insects. Even the breeze seemed to stop. The air felt heavy, like the moment before a storm. Jay and I shared a look, and without needing to say a word, we both unzipped our packs and pulled out our handguns. It wasn't paranoia. We'd both grown up knowing that sometimes, out in the woods, you weren't at the top of the food chain. The quiet felt wrong, and our first thought was predator. Maybe a mountain lion, maybe a pack of coyotes. We scanned the edges of the clearing, our eyes darting from tree to tree. Then Jay grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in tight enough to hurt, and nodded across the pond. I followed his gaze, and there she was. A woman, standing at the tree-line on the far side of the water. She was far enough away that I couldn't make out many details, but she wasn't moving. Just standing. Watching. I couldn't tell. We stood there for a minute that felt like an hour. None of us spoke. The girls hadn't noticed her yet, and I didn't want to alarm them. After what felt like forever, Jay and I decided to keep moving. Maybe she lived nearby, maybe it was nothing. We kept walking, and I glanced over my shoulder when we reached the trees. She was gone, just like that. The sounds of the forest came rushing back all at once. Birds, wind in the leaves, the buzzing of bugs. It was like someone hit play after pausing the world. We hiked a couple more miles and found a good spot to set up camp. It was getting late, and none of us wanted to build camp in the dark. The site was solid, flat ground, a good amount of cover from the wind, and a nice view through the trees. We set up the tent, got the cots unfolded, and built a fire. It felt good to relax. We cracked open some beers, cooked up a little food, and sat around the fire swapping stories. The strange moment at the pond started to feel far away, like it didn't matter anymore. Later, as the fire burned down to glowing coals, I wandered off with the girl I'd been flirting with. She said she needed help setting up part of the tent, but really we just wanted some time alone. We messed around a bit, laughed quietly, tried not to wake the others. Then she stopped, pulling back and looking around with this uneasy expression. I asked what was wrong, and she said it just felt really quiet all of a sudden. That same heavy silence from earlier. It sent a chill through me. We dressed quickly and went back out to the fire. The others didn't seem to notice anything, just teased us for taking so long with the tent. The next morning, we woke up and found the propane stove had been turned on. Not lit, just on. The fuel canister was empty. Nobody admitted to touching it, and it didn't make sense for any of us to waste it like that. We shrugged it off, tried to laugh about it, but it stuck in the back of my mind. The second morning, things went missing. A lantern we'd left by the fire was gone. A sweatshirt the girl I liked had left draped over a chair vanished too. We looked around camp, thinking maybe someone moved them and forgot, but they weren't anywhere. We figured maybe we'd been careless, maybe we'd packed them up by accident, maybe an animal took them. We didn't want to make a big deal out of it. That day, we went looking for a waterfall we'd read about online. The trail followed a river upstream, and the hike was beautiful. For a while, we forgot about the weirdness. The water rushed over rocks, the trees filtered the sunlight into golden patches, and the girls were in good spirits. Then it happened again. The quiet, the same deep, unnatural silence. Jay caught my eye and motioned up a hill beside the river. I looked and barely made out a figure through the trees. The same woman, same clothes, same stillness, just standing there. Jay told the girls he thought he saw a mountain lion and went up the hill, making noise to try and scare it off. He came back down after a while, saying it was gone, but later told me he hadn't seen anything when he got to the top. We moved on and found the waterfall. The girls stripped down and jumped in the river, laughing, splashing, and for a while, things felt normal again. We hiked back to camp, tired but happy. Then we saw the mess. Our camp wasn't destroyed, but it was clear something had been there. Stuff was knocked over, some of our food was gone, and our gear had been rummaged through. We told the girls it was raccoons. That night, Jay and I kept our guns within easy reach. I don't think I slept more than an hour or two. My crush was curled up next to me, and I remember waking up to her hand gripping my arm so tight it hurt. She didn't say anything, just gave me this look that told me to listen. The silence was back. I could see Jay sitting up across the tent, his eyes wide, his hand resting on his gun. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. We stayed like that for hours, waiting for something to happen. The air felt like it was pressing in on us. Finally, the sky started to lighten, and we packed up fast. The hike out was tense. The forest stayed quiet the whole way, like the trees were holding their breath. There were moments I thought I saw her through the trees, just a flash of movement, a shape that didn't belong, but I never got a clear look. We didn't go near the pond. We didn't stop to rest. We just kept walking, faster than we'd hiked in. The weight of our packs nothing compared to the need to get out of those woods. When we finally reached the truck, the relief was like a wave crashing over us. We threw our gear in the bed, climbed in, and started the drive back. It wasn't until we were miles away, back on the main road, that we started to talk about it. Each of us had moments where we thought we saw her or heard something, but none of us had wanted to say it out loud at the time, and none of us could describe her face. It was like trying to remember a dream. We knew we saw her, but the details were just out of reach. We didn't see any ghosts. There was no fairy tale ending, no final confrontation. But whatever was out there, it was real enough that I've never been camping or hiking at night since. We were prepared for the wild, for animals, for storms, but we weren't prepared for that. And I don't think I ever want to be that deep in the woods again. I work as a counselor at a summer camp in Southern California, way out where the woods stretch for miles without any towns or even small houses nearby. The kind of place where once the sun goes down, it's just you, the trees, and the sounds of the forest. The camp itself isn't fancy. We've got cabins that have seen better days, paths that wind through the brush, and a mess hall that always smells faintly of burned food no matter what's cooking. But it's a good place, the kind of camp kids remember for a lifetime. I've worked there for a few summers, and by now I thought I'd seen or heard just about everything. Deer that stare at you through the trees like they're sizing you up. Coyotes yipping and howling so far away, you can almost convince yourself it's just the wind. Even a mountain lion that people swore they saw one evening near the archery range. The place has a feeling, though, one that gets under your skin if you let it. There are old stone foundations hidden back in the woods, the sort of thing that makes you wonder who lived there before the camp was built. There's this big flat rock near the creek that some of the staff say feels off, like the air's too still when you're near it. And of course there are the stories, the ones told around campfires to scare the kids, the ones whispered between counselors late at night when no one else is listening. It was one of those nights when things felt a little heavier than usual. I'd just finished helping my cabin settle down for the night. The kids were finally quiet after the usual chaos of bedtime at camp. Someone couldn't find their flashlight. Another forgot to brush their teeth. One more had a homesick moment right as the lights went out. I stepped outside for a bit of air, enjoying the silence now that my job was done for the day. The sky was clear, full of stars, and the night was cool in that way it only gets out there, where the city heat doesn't touch. Another counselor, Matt, was standing nearby, leaning against the railing, and we started talking, just quietly so we wouldn't wake anyone. That's when Sadie came tearing down the path, her entire cabin of teenage girls right behind her. They were all dressed in black, like they'd been up to something, and they looked terrified. Faces pale, eyes wide, breathing hard like they'd been running flat out. I'd known Sadie for a few years. She wasn't the type to panic. She was steady, the kind of person you wanted nearby if something actually went wrong. But seeing her like that made my stomach twist in a way I didn't like. She shouted something at me about hearing a ghost, and said she'd explain once she got her girls settled. Then she disappeared into the dark, leading them back toward their cabin. I stood there for a while, heart thudding in my chest. Matt and I didn't say anything. There wasn't really anything to say. We just waited. About half an hour later, Sadie came back. Her face was still pale, but she'd gotten her breathing under control. She explained what had happened, that she'd taken her campers out on a night hike, had them all dress in black to play ninjas, just harmless fun. They were on their way back, moving along one of the darker parts of the trail, when they heard it. A voice, faint at first, calling from beyond the tree line. Help. A small voice, like a kid's voice, begging for help. But each time they heard it, the sound changed. It got less clear, more twisted, like it wasn't quite human anymore. Still like a child, but wrong somehow. That was enough for them. They ran. I listened, trying to make sense of it, trying to think of some explanation. Maybe someone playing a prank. Maybe an echo, or the wind carrying sound from somewhere else. But Sadie wasn't someone who jumped at shadows. If it had scared her, it was worth checking out. So we decided we'd go take a look. We grabbed our flashlights and set off toward the spot she described, moving quietly so we wouldn't wake the camp. The path was familiar, one I'd walked 100 times during the day, but at night it felt different. The trees seemed closer, the shadows deeper. Every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, made me flinch just a little. We didn't talk as we walked. There wasn't anything to say. The only sound was the crunch of our boots on the dirt and the distant, soft hum of the forest at night. And then, as we got closer to the area Sadie had described, we heard it. At first, it was exactly like she said. A faint voice, so far off it barely reached us, calling for help. The voice of a child, thin and small, carried on the wind. But as we kept walking, it changed. The sound warped, stretched, like someone was trying to mimic the voice and failing. The words were still there, but the tone wasn't right anymore. The pitch was off, too high, too sharp, and it didn't come from one spot. It seemed like it was coming from everywhere. The trees, the rocks, the hillside itself. My heart was pounding now, harder than before. The air felt colder somehow, though I knew that was probably just fear getting the better of me. I glanced at Sadie. She looked as uneasy as I felt. We didn't need to say anything. Without a word, we turned and headed back, fast at first, then faster. We didn't run exactly, but we didn't waste time either. The sound followed us for a while, then faded as we got closer to camp. By the time we reached the main clearing, the normal sounds of the forest had returned. The soft chirp of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the distant yip of a coyote. We didn't try to investigate again that night. We stayed near the cabins, where the lights from the mess hall and the glow of a few lanterns made the dark seem a little less heavy. We told the story to the other counselors, those who were still up and willing to listen. They laughed, of course, said it was probably just an animal, that we'd scared ourselves, that we'd let the stories of the camp get into our heads. The next day, the camp director called a meeting. We all gathered outside the mess hall after breakfast, sitting on the benches or standing around, still tired from the night before. The director was calm, like always. He told us we shouldn't be worrying the campers with ghost stories or strange noises. He reminded us that bobcats lived in the area, and that at night they sometimes made high-pitched calls that could sound like a child crying if you didn't know better. That they were harmless, more afraid of us than we were of them, and that we should reassure the kids if they heard anything strange. Just bobcats, nothing to be afraid of. That explanation made sense, of course. Logical, simple, but even now, I remember that sound. The way it filled the air, the way it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I've heard bobcats since then. I know what they sound like. And maybe that's all it was that night. Maybe. But I know what it felt like in that moment. The cold knot of fear in my stomach. The sense that something wasn't right. The way Sadie, who never panicked, looked ready to run from the moment she heard it. The rest of the summer, the other counselors teased us about it. Anytime a coyote howled or an owl hooted, someone would nudge me or Sadie and ask if we were going to go investigate. We laughed it off, of course. What else could we do? But sometimes late at night, when I was lying in my bunk listening to the forest, I'd hear a sound, just a bobcat, I told myself, and I'd remember that night. And I'd feel that same cold knot in my stomach, just for a moment, before sleep took me. I had never felt so small, so aware of the dark weight of night, as I did that night below the Saucante Pass. We had set up camp after a long day of trekking, our bodies worn down from the climb, the thin air, the cold that bit harder the higher we went. Our guide had chosen a flat spot, not far from a rough path that wound its way between the peaks. We were above 10,000 feet, maybe closer to 12,000. I remember the way the wind hissed through the rocks as we pitched our tents. We weren't exposed, not exactly. We had the shelter of a big, garage-sized tent, the kind meant to protect from the mountain winds. Inside that big tent, 4 smaller tents were set up, one for each of us. I'd crawled into my sleeping bag that night exhausted. The cold kept at bay only by layers of clothing and the warmth of the bag. Sleep came fast, deep, and heavy, the kind that only comes after real work. Sometime in the night I awoke, suddenly aware that something was wrong. I didn't open my eyes at first, just lay still listening. The kind of listening that you do when your heart is already starting to speed up, when your body knows before your mind does that something isn't right. There was a sound, a soft kind of scraping, and then a push. Something was pushing against the side of my tent. Not just a poke or a brush, but a firm, heavy push that made the thin fabric bow inward, made the stakes creak where they held the corners to the ground. I froze, my mind scrambling for explanations. I tried to think logically, tried to tell myself it was probably nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling of mass on the other side of that fabric, the sense that whatever was out there was big, bigger than a person for sure. The kind of big that makes you think twice about moving or making noise. The thin mountain air didn't help. My thoughts raced, the altitude making my head feel light even as my heart pounded harder. What the hell was it? I thought of the wildlife we'd heard about. A puma. Could a mountain lion be out there, curious about our camp? Or worse, maybe it wasn't curious. Maybe it was hungry. I'd heard of bears in the Andes, though I didn't know if we were in their territory. Or maybe something else, something I hadn't thought of. I even let my mind drift, against my better judgment, to the kind of stories you hear about these mountains. The locals talk about strange things up here, and though I didn't believe in that, in the middle of the night, in a cold tent miles from anywhere, your mind starts to play with ideas you'd laugh off in daylight. Then came the breathing, heavy, steady, and close. I could hear it right through the thin material of my tent. Slow exhale, slow inhale. A kind of deep, chesty sound that only comes from something with real lungs behind it. I could feel the vibration of it through the cold ground, through the fabric. This was no small animal, no fox or stray dog nosing around for scraps. This thing had weight, had presence. I lay there, frozen, trying to decide what to do. The logical part of my brain told me to wake someone up. There were other people just feet away, in their own tents. We were all together inside the larger shelter. One shout would have the whole group up, and together we could deal with whatever was out there. But I hesitated. I didn't want to look foolish if it turned out to be nothing. Didn't want the guys to think I was overreacting. Didn't want the women in our group to see me as the one who panicked. So I waited, listening, my mind racing, my breath shallow. After what felt like hours, but was probably only a minute or two, I made up my mind. I couldn't just lie there, waiting for whatever was outside to decide what to do next. I had to see, had to know. My hands shook a little as I reached for the zipper of my tent. The sound of it seemed deafening in the silence. I worked it down slowly, inch by inch, trying not to make more noise than I had to. The cold night air rushed in, sharp and dry, biting at my face. I eased out, moving slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements. And there it was, just a few feet away in the dim light of the moon filtering through the high clouds. A massive, longhorned cow. Its coat was dark, almost blending with the night, but its horns caught the light just enough to be visible. It stood there, still as a statue, staring at me with blank black eyes. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I felt my heart slow a little, the immediate terror fading, replaced by a kind of cautious curiosity. I grew up around farms, so I knew enough to read an animal's body language. This one wasn't tense, wasn't about to charge. Its head was low, its breathing slow and even. It let out a soft snort, more of an exhale than anything else, and I realized that this was probably a domesticated animal. It must have wandered in, looking for shelter from the cold wind. Maybe it belonged to some shepherd who grazed animals up here in the highlands during the warmer months and left them to fend for themselves when the weather turned. But even knowing that, I couldn't just let it stay. I didn't like the idea of a 2,000-pound animal sharing the space with our flimsy little tents, separated only by a sheet of fabric. One wrong step, and someone could get hurt. I had to move it out without spooking it. I stood slowly, trying to make myself look bigger, arms out wide. I didn't want to scare it, just encourage it to move. I started making the kind of soft sounds I'd heard farmers make when guiding cattle, low and steady, nothing sharp or loud. The cow watched me for a moment, then with a kind of slow, resigned air, it began to back up. Step by step, I guided it toward the opening of the larger shelter. The night was so quiet except for the soft shuffling of the cow's hooves on the hard ground and the occasional creak of the tent fabric as it brushed against the animal's side. The wind had died down, leaving just the two of us and the mountain silence. I kept my voice low, kept my movements slow, and the cow responded, backing out into the night, as if it understood what I wanted. Once it was clear of the shelter, it stood for a moment, looking at me with those blank eyes, then gave another snort and turned away, ambling off into the darkness. I watched until it was out of sight, the sound of its hooves fading into the night. The adrenaline slowly drained out of me, leaving me cold and shaky, but relieved. I stood there for a while, listening to the night, waiting to see if it would come back. But all I heard was the soft sighing of the wind picking up again, the occasional distant call of some night bird, and the creak of the tents settling in the cold. I checked around the shelter, made sure everything was still secure, then crawled back into my tent. The cold hit harder after the exertion, and it took a long time for sleep to come again. But when it did, it was the deep, dreamless kind that only comes after a scare like that. In the morning, the others woke to find me already up, standing outside, looking out toward the trail. I didn't say anything at first, just took in the cold morning air, the way the light touched the peaks, the way the world looked so peaceful after the night's events. When they asked, I told them about the visitor, about how I'd guided it out. There were some laughs, some teasing, but it didn't bother me. I'd faced down the beast at Tanagra, and that was enough. The rest of the trek passed without incident, but I never forgot that night. The feel of that heavy breath against the fabric of my tent, the weight of the animal just inches away, the way the world felt so large and empty in the dark. It was a reminder that out there, in the high places of the world, we're just visitors, and sometimes the locals, whether they're human or not, wander by to remind us of that. Living back in the middle of the woods, I had what felt like endless space to run around, explore, and more often than not, get myself into trouble. Our house sat on a large piece of land, surrounded on all sides by thick forest. During the day, it was beautiful. Tall trees that let sunlight filter through in patches, the soft sound of the wind rustling leaves, and birds calling out from hidden branches. But at night, it was a different world entirely. The woods seemed to close in, the trees darker and taller, and every little sound stood out in the quiet. But even so, I loved it. My friends and I spent most of our free time out there, especially during summer when the nights were warm and the days seemed to last forever. We had this thing we did that we called campouts, though really, they weren't true camping trips. We'd set up tents or makeshift shelters a little ways from the house, close enough that if we got cold or hungry, we could head inside for food or a bathroom break. It felt like the best of both worlds to us back then. We could play at being outdoorsmen while having the comfort of home within reach. Every time we did one of these campouts, we'd come up with games to play after dark. Hide and seek was a favorite, but over time, we made it more exciting. That's how Manhunt started. The idea was simple. One person, the hunter, would have a flashlight. Everyone else would hide. The hunter's job was to find us in the dark. We could move around, try to sneak closer to the house without being caught, or just stay put and hope we weren't seen. The woods became this giant playground where shadows and moonlight were our cover. That night started like any other. It was warm enough that we didn't need sleeping bags, just blankets spread out in the tents. The sky was clear, and the moon was bright, casting enough light through the trees that you could see the outlines of the trunks and the brush beneath them. Crickets chirped, and the air smelled like pine and dirt. There were maybe 5 or 6 of us, all kids from the neighborhood or cousins who lived nearby. We were all around the same age, give or take a year, old enough to think we were brave, but young enough to still get spooked by the dark if we let our imaginations run wild. After we got our tents set up and had eaten the usual campfire food, hot dogs and marshmallows, we decided it was time for Manhunt. We always fought over who got to be the hunter first, but that night, one of the older kids, who was usually faster and better at spotting us, got the job. He took the flashlight, and the rest of us scattered into the woods. We had a rule that you couldn't hide too close to the house or the tents. That would have made it too easy to win. So we ran deep enough into the trees that the house was just a soft yellow glow through the branches. I ended up with 2 other kids, crouched behind a fallen tree that was half rotted and covered in moss. The ground was soft with old leaves, and every now and then I could hear the snap of a twig as one of us shifted our weight. We tried to be quiet, but it wasn't easy. The night seemed so still that even the slightest sound felt loud. We could see the hunter's flashlight beam sweeping through the trees in the distance. It moved slowly, pausing here and there, then moving again. We watched it, holding our breath every time it came our way, only to let it out when the beam turned in another direction. After a while, I started to relax. The game felt familiar, almost routine. I kept my eyes on that beam of light, knowing where the hunter was, confident that as long as we stayed low and quiet, we'd be fine. But then something changed. From behind us, away from the house, deeper into the woods, I saw another light. It wasn't as steady as the hunter's flashlight. It flickered a bit, like whoever was holding it was moving fast or nervous. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the other kids, maybe someone who had been caught and was helping hunt the rest of us. But we never did that. Once you were caught, you went back to the house and waited. You didn't join in as another hunter. I listened hard, and that's when I heard it, the soft crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot. Someone was moving toward us from the direction of that light. The steps were uneven, like whoever it was kept changing pace. For a second, I froze. I tried to make sense of it. Maybe someone's parent had come out to check on us, but that didn't feel right. None of the adults ever came out that far. They trusted us to stay near enough to the house, and they knew we'd come running if anything was wrong. The 2 kids with me had noticed it too. I could feel the tension in the air, even though none of us said a word. The light kept coming closer, and so did the sound of footsteps. My heart was pounding so loud I was sure whoever it was could hear it. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to give away our hiding spot. But then the light swung our way for just a second, and that was enough. Without thinking, I shot up and started running. The others did the same. We didn't stop to look back. We didn't try to be quiet. We just ran as fast as we could toward the house, our feet slipping on leaves, catching on roots, crashing through the underbrush. The branches slapped at my arms and face, but I didn't care. All I could think about was getting back to the safety of that soft yellow glow through the trees. As we ran, we were yelling, not words exactly, just the kind of panicked shouts that come out when you're scared and trying to warn each other at the same time. I could hear the others behind me, their footsteps pounding the ground, breath coming in ragged gasps. The house seemed so far away at first, but it got closer with every stride, and finally, we broke out of the trees into the clearing around the house. We didn't stop running until we hit the porch, where we collapsed in a heap, hearts racing, trying to catch our breath. We stood there for a few moments, looking back at the woods. The light was gone. The sounds of footsteps were gone too. The night was quiet again, the crickets still chirping like nothing had happened. The hunter came running up from the other side, confused by the commotion, but we didn't have an explanation that made sense. We hadn't seen who it was, just the light and the sound of someone coming toward us. After a while, we calmed down. We stood there, watching the woods, but nothing else happened. No one came out. No light appeared. And eventually, we convinced ourselves that maybe it had just been someone out for a walk, though that seemed strange given how late it was and how far out we were. Or maybe one of the older neighbors cutting through the woods, not realizing we were out there playing. We didn't really know, but the fear we'd felt was real enough. It took us some time, but we went back to the tents, though we stayed closer to the house for the rest of the night. We didn't stop playing manhunt after that. If anything, it added to the excitement. But that night stuck with me. Even now, when I think back on it, I can still feel that moment of seeing the light where it shouldn't have been and hearing footsteps that didn't belong to anyone I knew. I don't think whoever it was had any bad intentions. In fact, they were probably just as startled as we were when a bunch of kids suddenly jumped up and tore through the woods screaming. But in that moment, in the dark, with the trees closing in around us and nothing but the moonlight and a flickering flashlight, it felt like the scariest thing in the world. And even though I know now that it was probably nothing, a part of me will always remember that rush of fear, that desperate race for the safety of home, and the way the woods seemed to swallow up the light and sound, leaving only the quiet night behind. It was one of those hot summer mornings where the air already felt heavy, like it was pressing down on my skin even before the day had really started. We had camped the night before at a quiet little spot by the lake, a place we'd been coming to for years. It wasn't the kind of campsite that had paved trails or clean little bathrooms with running water. It was rough, wild, the kind of place where nature felt like it still owned the land. My family always liked that about it. The lake was huge, ringed by woods that went on for miles, and a trail, a rough, 13-mile loop, wound through it all like a thread holding the place together. I'd ridden it before, but this was the first time I'd gone the whole way with my best friend, my dog, and my family all together. We started early, before the sun got too high. My bike tires crunched over the dirt and loose gravel as we made our way onto the trail. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. The trees on either side of us reached up, so high it felt like we were riding through a tunnel made of green. The lake glinted between the trees to our right, a calm sheet of blue that looked so peaceful I could almost forget how big it was, how deep. My dog trotted alongside my dad, her tongue lolling out, tail wagging. She was a good dog, always eager, always ready to explore, and usually well-behaved on these kinds of outings. The trail started out wide and easy. We talked in low voices, mostly about nothing, the kind of light chatter that passes the time on long rides. My friend rode ahead now and then, coasting down little dips in the trail, laughing when he hit bumps and caught a bit of air. The dog kept pace, ears pricked, nose in the wind. Everything felt normal. Safe. The kind of morning that leaves you thinking nothing bad could happen. But the trail changed as we went on. The dirt got looser, the ground rockier. We hit patches where tree roots pushed up through the path, making us slow down and pick our way around. The trees grew thicker, shadows falling across the trail, so that even though it was bright overhead, the ground looked dim. We came to spots where the land dropped away to the lake, steep slopes where the trail narrowed, and we had to focus just to keep from slipping. One section in particular stands out so clearly in my mind that even now, I can picture every stone, every branch. The trail there was maybe 3 feet wide, if that. To our left, the land rose up sharply, thick with brush and young trees. To our right, it dropped off at what felt like a near vertical angle, a hill of loose dirt and gravel that ended in the dark blue of the lake far below. It looked like part of the land had given way years before, a big bite taken out of the shoreline, leaving this dangerous little ledge behind. The slope must have been at least 70 degrees. One wrong step, one bad slide, and you'd be tumbling down with nothing to stop you. We paused at the start of that stretch. I remember gripping my handlebars tighter, feeling sweat that wasn't just from the heat prick at the back of my neck. My dad had the dog on a leash, walking carefully ahead of me. My friend was behind, quieter now. All of us knew this part would take focus. No joking, no messing around. For a few minutes, it felt like we were going to get through it fine. The dog, as always, was curious but stayed close. My dad kept a firm hold on the leash, his steps slow and deliberate. I kept my eyes on the trail, my tires bumping over the uneven ground. Every so often, a little shower of pebbles would skitter down the slope, bouncing toward the water far below. The sound made my stomach twist every time. Then, in one horrible moment, everything went wrong. The dog, maybe catching some scent on the wind or spotting movement in the brush below, pulled hard to the side. I saw it as if in slow motion, her paws scrabbling for purchase on the loose dirt, her body sliding toward the edge, ears back, tail down. My dad, without thinking, tightened his grip on the leash, trying to pull her back. But the force of her movement threw him off balance. His feet slipped on the gravel, and I saw him tip toward the slope, his body leaning at a dangerous angle. There was nothing I could do. My heart slammed against my ribs. I froze helpless as the image burned into my mind. My dad, my dog, both of them about to go over the edge, down that steep hill, down into the rocks and the cold, deep water. The terror I felt in that moment is something I can't really describe. It was like all the air left my lungs. My hands were still clamped on my handlebars, but my whole body was tense, every muscle braced for the sound of slipping, tumbling, the crash that would follow. But somehow, my dad managed to pull it back. His legs shook, his boots skidding on the gravel, but he shifted his weight just enough, leaned back just right. He hauled on the leash, muscles straining, his face tight with effort. The dog, wide-eyed and scared now, scrambled with all four paws, trying to help. Inch by inch, he brought her back to the narrow strip of trail. His chest rose and fell with deep, heavy breaths. The danger passed as suddenly as it had started. I don't think I moved for a full minute, just stood there, shaking, watching him steady himself, watching the dog sit down and pant, looking as rattled as we felt. My friend was silent behind me. The only sound was the wind through the trees and the soft lapping of the lake far below. After that, none of us said anything. There was nothing to say. We just kept going, moving slow and careful along the rest of that narrow stretch. My eyes kept flicking to the edge, watching for any sign of the trail giving way, any hint of another slip. Every crunch of gravel beneath my tires sounded too loud, like a warning. When we finally reached a wider, safer part of the trail, I felt like I could breathe again. The tension eased out of my shoulders. My legs felt weak, like they might give out, but I kept pedaling. We finished the trail, though the rest of it passed in a kind of blur. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The slide, the tilt, the way my dad somehow managed to pull them both back from the brink. Every time I thought about how close they'd come to falling, my stomach turned over again. Back at camp, we didn't talk much about it. We just went about our evening, cooking dinner, tending to the fire, trying to settle our nerves. But that part of the trail stayed with me. I never rode that section again. Even thinking about it now, years later, I can see it so clearly. I can feel the heat of that day, smell the pine, hear the small stones skittering down to the water. And I can feel that fear, sharp and cold, like it's still there waiting for me every time I remember. It started as a plan that sounded good on paper, like most of our dumb ideas usually did. A group camping trip in the middle of nowhere, Arizona. No campsites, no rangers, no one for miles. Just us, a few tents, a couple of coolers, and what we thought would be a quiet night under the stars. We'd packed up our gear, loaded the trucks, and drove hours down dusty back roads until the last cell signal blinked out, and we knew we were truly on our own. That was the point, I guess. Get away from it all. Just us in the wild. We found a spot that looked good enough. Flat, clear, a bit of brush around the edges, but nothing too thick. A couple of scraggly trees stood watch on one side, the kind that looked like they'd been half dead for decades. We set up camp quick, everyone throwing down their tents or rolling out sleeping bags. There was a fire pit built up with rocks from the area, a little makeshift thing someone else had probably used before. We got a fire going as the sun went down, the sky burning orange and pink over the endless stretch of desert. It felt good at first. The kind of peace you only get out there, where it's just quiet enough that your own thoughts seem louder. We cooked up some food, drank a few beers, laughed about stupid stuff. The stars came out, and they were incredible. So many of them, and so bright, like they were close enough to reach out and grab. It's funny how quickly that peaceful feeling can turn to unease though. Out there, every sound is sharper. A branch snapping, a gust of wind that makes the brush whisper. You tell yourself it's nothing, but part of you keeps listening, waiting for something that shouldn't be there. We stayed up late, just hanging out by the fire, until one by one people started turning in. I was one of the last. I remember staring at the embers, watching them glow and fade, before finally crawling into the tent I was sharing with two of my buddies. We didn't even talk, just zipped up the door, got into our bags, and let the desert night take over. I don't know how long I'd been asleep when I woke up. At first I wasn't sure what had pulled me out of sleep. I lay there, eyes open in the dark, listening. And then I heard it, sniffing, right outside the tent. Slow, deliberate, like whatever it was knew we were in there and wanted to check us out. My heart started pounding. I thought about bears or coyotes or something worse. My first stupid thought was that maybe we hadn't tied up the garbage, that we'd lured something in with the scent of food. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make a sound. I just lay there, listening as the sniffing moved along the edge of the tent. I felt my friends tense up beside me. One of them shifted just enough that I could feel his hand brush against my arm, a silent way of saying, "You hear that too, right?" We all knew. We were all awake now, holding our breath, waiting to see what was going to happen next. The sniffing stopped for a second, and then I heard it move away, towards the next tent over. I could hear it, soft steps in the dirt, then the same slow sniffing, right up close against the fabric. It felt like forever, like time had slowed down to nothing, and all we could do was lay there and hope it would go away. And then, from the other tent, one of our friends burst out. I heard the zipper, heard him shout and make a racket. He had his gun with him. I remember the sound of it being cocked, the safety off. He was trying to scare off whatever it was. I expected to hear something running off into the night, maybe crashing through the brush. But what I heard instead was footsteps. Human footsteps. Someone running. My friend kept shouting, kept making noise, and finally came back to the tents out of breath. It wasn't an animal. It was some guy. Some guy who'd come up on our camp, gone through our coolers and our food, and had been sniffing around our tents like he belonged there. Like we were the intruders, and he was checking us out. We didn't waste any time. Everyone was up, stuffing sleeping bags into packs, breaking down tents as fast as we could in the dark. The fire was dead, but we didn't care. We wanted out of there. We threw everything into the trucks and got back on the road, driving until we were too tired to go any further. We slept in shifts at a truck stop, engine idling, doors locked. None of us talked much about it. Just a guy, we said. Just a weirdo. But it didn't feel that simple. You'd think we'd have learned our lesson, but a year later we went back. Not the exact same spot, but nearby. Same kind of terrain. Same middle-of-nowhere feel. We thought we were being smart this time. No tents. No soft targets. We'd all sleep in the beds of the trucks or in the backs of the SUVs. We joked about it, said no one could sniff a Tacoma. We set up a small fire again, parked the vehicles in a loose circle, tried to make it feel safer somehow. As the sun went down, we ate and drank and told ourselves it was fine. That last time was just a freak thing. Just bad luck. What were the odds it would happen again? That night, I was in the back of my SUV with my girlfriend. The windows were cracked just enough to let in some air, and the night was still and quiet. The kind of quiet that presses in on you. I must have fallen asleep at some point, because the next thing I knew I was waking up with light in my face. Not the sun, not the moon, a flashlight. Someone was shining a light right through the window, straight at me. My first instinct was to sit up, say something, but something in me stopped. Instead, I stayed still, kept my breathing slow and even, pretended I was still asleep. I felt my girlfriend tense up next to me and prayed she'd do the same. The light stayed on us for what felt like forever, then finally moved away. I could hear footsteps in the dirt, slow and careful, moving from vehicle to vehicle. I heard it stop at my buddy's truck, the light clicking on again, sweeping over them as they slept in the bed. One of them snored loud and steady, and I remember thinking how that sound somehow made it worse. Like we were all so exposed out there. I lifted my head just enough to see him. An older guy. Not homeless looking, not dirty, just normal. Like someone's grandpa maybe. if Grandpa had wandered miles into the desert in the middle of the night to shine lights on strangers. He wasn't in any hurry. He just stood there, shining the light, watching everyone like he was trying to make up his mind about something. Then, after another stretch of silence, he turned and walked off into the dark. No rush, just gone. The second I couldn't hear his steps anymore, I was out of that truck, waking everyone up. Turns out I wasn't the only one who'd been pretending to sleep. Almost everyone had seen or heard something. We didn't bother packing up. We left the coolers, the chairs, the firewood, just threw ourselves into the vehicles, and took off down that dirt road like the devil himself was behind us. We didn't stop until we hit the highway, and even then we didn't say much. Just a guy, we told ourselves. Just some old guy. But again, it didn't feel that simple. I don't know what he wanted. I don't know what the first guy wanted either. All I know is that out there, in the middle of nowhere, where there's no one to hear you scream, no one to help, even a normal-looking person can be the scariest thing in the world. And that was the last time I camped anywhere near Tucson, Arizona. We never went back. Some places just don't want you there. And sometimes, it's not the wild you should be afraid of. It's the people. The weekend had started out as one of the best we'd had in a long time. It was the first time we felt like we could splurge a bit after all the hard work we'd put into the business, and being able to afford the RV instead of cramming into the bunkhouses made us feel like we'd really made it. The retreat was something we always looked forward to, but this year was special. The girls were excited too, probably more about the camper than the retreat itself. They loved the idea of sleeping in a house on wheels, with real beds and their own little space. I remember watching their faces as we set up camp, their eyes wide with excitement. The weather had been unseasonably warm for fall, hot enough that we were grateful for the air conditioning in the RV during the afternoons when the sun bore down hard. All weekend we were in and out of the camper, going to different activities, crafts, games, hikes, and shared meals. We'd spend the days busy and only come back to the RV to cool off or grab something. There was always a group of people nearby during the daytime, lots of noise and laughter, and the hum of retreat life. Nights were quiet though. By late evening, everyone settled into their cabins or tents, and the campground felt peaceful, if a little isolated. It wasn't until Sunday evening, after everyone had packed up and left, that the quiet felt different. By then, the air inside the RV had grown heavy with an awful smell. At first, I thought maybe one of the girls had left food out or something had spilled, but it became clear fast that it was coming from the bathroom. I went to check and nearly gagged. The toilet was backing up. It was one of those smells that sticks to the back of your throat, no matter how much you try to avoid breathing it in. My husband took one look and said he'd go grab something from the Walmart in the next town. We didn't want to risk getting hit with damage charges from the rental place. So around 8:30, he got in the car and left. I remember standing at the door, watching his taillights disappear down the narrow, dark road that twisted through the woods. The campground, once lively and full of people, now felt empty. The bunkhouses were dark. The fire pits were cold. The only light came from our RV and the small lamp at the main office a ways off. I tried not to let it bother me. We were fine, I told myself. Safe. I kept myself busy, straightening up, packing some of our things, getting the girls to calm down for bed. They were wound up from the weekend, excited and overtired at the same time, but eventually I got them settled. I checked the doors, made sure they were locked, pulled the blinds shut on the windows. The camper felt smaller now, somehow. Quieter. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the occasional creak of the RV as it settled on its supports. When everything was done, I finally let myself sit. I climbed into the bed in the back, the one my husband and I were sharing, and opened my book. I read for a bit, but I couldn't seem to focus. The quiet was starting to feel too quiet. Every little sound made me tense. I told myself I was being silly. Still, I found myself glancing at the clock over and over, checking how long he'd been gone. The time passed slowly. Then I heard it, a clicking sound. It came from the window just behind the bed. It was faint at first, but enough to make me stop and listen. My heart started to pound. I tried to brush it off. Maybe a branch was brushing against the glass. Maybe it was a bug or an animal. But it didn't stop. The clicking continued, slow and steady, like someone deliberately tapping or scratching at the window. I sat up, straining to hear. I told myself to stay calm. I slid off the bed and moved slowly toward the kitchen area. The sound seemed to follow, moving along the outside wall of the RV. My skin prickled with goosebumps. I grabbed the biggest knife I could find in the drawer, the handle slick in my sweaty hand. My heart was racing so fast I could barely breathe. I didn't want to wake the girls. I didn't want them to be scared. I just wanted whoever was out there to go away. I climbed up into the loft bed above the cab, crouching low so I could see through the small front window without being seen. I kept my eyes on the door. That's when I heard it, the rattle of the door handle. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. Someone was trying the door, testing it to see if it was locked. Then came the scraping sound, metal on metal. My stomach dropped. I stayed as still as I could, barely breathing, knife clutched tight. I scanned the inside of the camper, checking that everything was locked. I thought about trying to call for help. I fumbled for my phone and tried to get a signal, moving it around, holding it high-low, near the windows. Nothing. It wouldn't connect. I was alone out here with the kids, and whoever was outside wasn't going away. Minutes passed, but they felt like hours. The sound stopped eventually, but I didn't relax. I didn't dare move from my spot. I kept watching, waiting, every nerve in my body on edge. Then, finally, I saw headlights. My husband was back. The relief that flooded through me was overwhelming. I stayed where I was, though, watching until I was sure it was him. He parked and came inside, giving me a strange look when he saw me crouched there with the knife. I wanted to tell him what happened, but he brushed it off, saying it was probably just my imagination or the wind, maybe an animal. He didn't want to believe something bad had almost happened. I didn't argue. I just stayed awake the rest of the night, listening, waiting, too shaken to sleep. The next morning, we packed up early. Neither of us said much. I think he knew I was still rattled. We drove into town to return the RV. The rental guy came out to do the inspection, walking around the camper, checking for damage. He called my husband over at one point, and I watched them from inside, my heart sinking as I saw their faces change. Turns out, someone had tried to break in. The man pointed out where the gasket around the back window had been sliced away, clean like it had been done with a knife or a blade of some kind. There were scratches in the paint, long thin marks like someone had scraped along the side, trying to find a way in. The lock on the window was damaged too, bent and dented where someone had tried to force it. And the door lock showed signs of tampering, scratches, gouges where a blade had been jammed between the door and the frame. Whoever it was had been determined. They hadn't just tried the door and walked away when it didn't open. They'd worked at it, tried different ways to get inside. The rental guy didn't blame us, thankfully. He could see we hadn't done it, but I could tell he was disturbed too. He said it wasn't something they saw often. We drove home that day, quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts. I kept thinking about how close it had been. If that person had gotten in, what would have happened? I don't like to think about it. I'm just glad they didn't. After that, I refused to go camping like that again. I wouldn't stay somewhere so isolated, not with just us, not where help was so far away. From then on, we camped with friends, in bigger groups, in busier places. I still remember that night so clearly. The sounds, the fear, the way my heart wouldn't stop pounding. Even now, all these years later, just thinking about it makes the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It's not something you forget. We had planned this trip for a few weeks. It was supposed to be simple. Just a one-night out-and-back hike through the rainforest in southern Brazil. Nothing too ambitious, just enough to test our gear before heading to Patagonia for something longer and colder. My friend and I both thought it would be a good idea. Stretch our legs, break in some boots, see how the tents held up, that sort of thing. The maps made it look pretty straightforward. A path through dense forest, some elevation gain, a flat spot to camp, then back down the next day. What we didn't account for was how punishing the terrain would actually be. We set out early, trying to beat the worst of the heat, but it didn't matter. Within an hour, we were drenched. It was like walking through soup. The air itself felt heavy with moisture. Even standing still, I felt like I was sweating buckets. The rainforest was alive all around us. Birds we couldn't see called out from high in the canopy, and sometimes we'd catch a glimpse of bright feathers as one shot through the trees. The undergrowth was thick. Vines draped down from trees, roots curled across the trail like sleeping snakes, and everything was wet. The ground, the leaves, even the rocks seemed to sweat. And the climb. God, the climb. It was relentless. Up and up, switchback after switchback, legs burning, lungs working overtime in the humid air. We'd stop for water, wipe our faces, push on. There wasn't much wildlife aside from the birds. Too high, too cold at night for most animals or bugs to want to live up here. That was a blessing, at least. No mosquitoes, no biting flies. Just the constant, pressing wetness and the steep trail. After maybe 8 hours, hard to say exactly, because time blurred with the effort, we came to a flat area. The first real flat spot we'd seen since we started climbing. It wasn't much, just a patch where the forest opened a little, and the ground was more mud than slope. The rain started in earnest then. Thick, heavy drops that fell straight down, pounding the leaves, drumming on the hoods of our jackets. We looked at each other and silently agreed. This was camp. We didn't have much choice. I set up my tent as fast as I could, but everything was already soaked. The ground was more like a puddle than solid earth. Water seeped in through the bottom of my tent even as I sat inside. I tried to brush it out, but it was useless. My boots were wet, my socks were wet, my sleeping bag was damp. I gave up after a while, pulled out my book, sat cross-legged, and tried to ignore the fact that I was sitting in several inches of water. The sound of the rain filled everything. It was so loud that I could barely hear myself think. The sky darkened fast, and before I knew it, it was night. I must have dozed off at some point, because the next thing I remember was waking up to a sound that didn't belong. It was faint at first, so faint that I wasn't sure if I was imagining it. A voice, a woman's voice, singing. I lay still, trying to listen, straining to hear through the rain. The voice was soft and distant, floating through the trees. The song was slow, like a lullaby, the words in Portuguese. I couldn't make them out, not really, but I caught the word for rain. Chuva, repeated again and again. My heart started to race. It didn't make sense. We were miles from anywhere, in terrain that no one would be wandering through at this hour, in this weather. But the singing got louder. The voice drew closer, until it sounded like she was right outside our tents. I could hear the words more clearly now, though I still didn't understand most of them. The melody was strange, not unpleasant, but odd, like something from a different time. Then, just as suddenly as she'd come, the voice faded, moving past us, heading deeper into the forest. I lay awake, listening, waiting for something else. Footsteps, the crack of a branch, anything. But there was only the rain. Eventually, I drifted off again, though my sleep was uneasy. Maybe an hour later, I woke to the singing again. This time I heard it sooner, coming from far off. The same song, the same slow, steady melody. The voice moved towards us, growing louder as she came nearer. I lay there, frozen, listening as she passed by again, so close I could have called out. But I didn't. I stayed quiet, listening as the song grew faint again, the voice moving back the way it had come. There was something different in her tone this time, like she was tired, or maybe annoyed. I couldn't tell. I just lay there, heart pounding, waiting for the sound to disappear. When it did, I stared at the roof of my tent for a long time, unable to sleep. It happened one more time, maybe another hour later. The singing in the distance, coming closer. Except now the voice wasn't just singing. She was crying too. A soft, broken sob that wove through the melody. The sound of it made my skin crawl. There was something so sad about it, so human and raw. She passed us again, crying and singing, and moved on into the night. I didn't sleep after that. I just lay there, listening to the rain and the wind in the trees, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. I kept expecting the voice to return, but it didn't. The night dragged on, slow and heavy, until finally the sky began to lighten. When morning came, I unzipped my tent and stepped out into the wet, gray world. Everything was soaked. My boots squelched in the mud as I walked over to my friend's tent. He unzipped his door at almost the same time. We just looked at each other for a long moment. I could tell from his face that he'd heard it all, too. Neither of us said anything at first. We packed up our gear in silence, the rain still falling, though lighter now. My hands were clumsy with cold and tiredness. Everything was heavier with water. The tents, the packs, even my jacket felt like it weighed twice what it should. We didn't talk much. Just got our things together and started back down the trail. The way down was as hard as the way up. The mud was slick, and we slipped more than once. The clouds hung low, hiding the tops of the trees. The rain kept falling, steady and cold. My legs felt like lead. Every step was work. But we kept going, driven by the need to get out of that place, to get back to the car, to leave the forest behind. As we walked, I kept thinking about the woman. Who was she? What was she doing out there in the middle of the night, so far from anywhere? I couldn't come up with an answer that made sense. No one would be hiking that trail at that hour, in that weather. It wasn't the kind of place people wandered through. The terrain was too rough, the trail too remote. When we finally made it back to the trailhead, we were exhausted. Mud-caked, soaked, hungry. We loaded our gear into the car without a word, climbed in, and sat there for a minute before starting the engine. I looked out at the forest one last time. The rain still fell, soft and steady, pattering on the windshield. The trees stood silent and still, hiding whatever secrets they held. My friend started the car, and we drove away, leaving the mountain behind us. The memory of that night stayed with me. Even now, I can still hear that voice sometimes, soft and distant, the strange melody weaving through the sound of the rain. I don't know who she was or why she was there. Maybe she was lost. Maybe she was looking for someone. Maybe she was out of her mind, wandering through the forest, singing her song to the rain. I'll never know. All I know is that we were there, in that remote, wet, cold place, and so was she. And for those few strange hours, our paths crossed in the dark. I had been planning that solo camping trip for months. The idea was simple: get away from everything. No cell service, no people, no noise. Just me, the woods, and some peace and quiet. I picked north-central Pennsylvania because I'd read about how remote it was, with miles of forest that hardly anyone ever visited. That was exactly what I was looking for. I loaded up my pack with all the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, food, stove, first aid kit, knife, map, compass. I wasn't planning on seeing anyone out there, so I wanted to make sure I had everything I needed. The drive out took most of the day, the last part of it along dirt Forest Service roads that got narrower and rougher the farther I went. I bounced over ruts and potholes for more than an hour before I finally found a place to pull over and park. The trailhead wasn't marked. I'd done enough research and stared at maps long enough to know where to start hiking. But even so, it wasn't much of a trail. It was more like an old game path that had once been used by people but hadn't seen much foot traffic in years. As soon as I started down it, I could tell how overgrown it was. Branches hung low across the trail, weeds and grass reached knee-high in places, and spiderwebs stretched across it everywhere. Every few steps I had to swipe another web out of my face, and by the time I was half a mile in, I felt like I was wearing pieces of spiderweb like a second skin. There were no footprints, no cut branches, nothing to show that anyone had been through there recently. It was just me, making my way deeper into the woods, following this narrow path as it wound along a small creek at the bottom of a rocky valley. The sound of the water was the only thing I could hear besides the birds and the occasional rustle of a squirrel or chipmunk in the underbrush. The farther I went, the more isolated I felt, which was the whole point, really. But there was a weight to that isolation that I hadn't fully expected. I hiked for about 6 miles, maybe a little more. I wasn't in a hurry. I was looking for a good spot to set up camp, someplace flat enough for my tent and near water. But the valley was narrow, and the creek cut through it with rocks and boulders strewn everywhere. There weren't many places that looked inviting. The sun started to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees, and I knew I needed to pick a spot soon. I didn't want to be setting up camp in the dark. That's when I came to the fork in the creek. The trail crossed over the water there, and just beyond it was a flat area that looked perfect. I felt relieved. Finally, I'd found my spot. But as I got closer, I started to see things that made me slow down. There was a tarp lying on the ground near a small stone fire ring. A big log had been chopped with an axe, the cuts still looking relatively fresh. It wasn't rotted or covered in moss like you'd expect if it had been sitting for a long time. I crossed the creek, stepping carefully on the rocks to keep my boots dry, and started looking around. That's when I saw the rest of it. Stuff was scattered everywhere. There was camping gear, the kind of things you'd find in any hiker's pack. Food packets, a small cooking set, a rolled-up sleeping pad, a first aid kit. But no pack. Everything that should have been inside a pack was just laying there on the ground, like someone had dumped it out in a hurry or maybe abandoned it. Down by the creek there was a pile of clothes. They looked like they'd been sitting out for at least a day, probably longer. The fabric was damp, and the colors were muted from soaking up the rain. A towel hung limply from a low branch, like someone had used it and left it to dry, but then forgot about it. I walked a little farther and found the area that had been used as a toilet. There was toilet paper scattered around in little piles, more than a dozen spots where someone had clearly gone. Judging by the amount, whoever it was had been there for a while. A week or two, maybe more. It felt like stumbling on the remnants of someone's life, but the person was missing. And then there was the cage. That's the only word I can use to describe it. It was about 4 feet on each side, built out of saplings that had been cut and tied together at the corners to form a cube. Each face of the cube had crossbars, also tied in place, forming X shapes that gave it a kind of structure. But it wasn't solid. The gaps between the saplings were wide enough that anything could have gotten in or out. It wouldn't have kept an animal inside. Hell, it wouldn't have kept a child inside. And it wasn't strong. The wood was thin, maybe an inch thick at best. It looked like something a kid might build as a fort, but it had been built with too much care for that. The knots were tight, and the saplings were all cut to about the same length, like whoever made it had taken their time. It didn't make sense. I stood there for a long time just looking at it, trying to figure out what it was for. Nothing came to mind. It wasn't a trap, not in any way I could see. It wasn't shelter. It wasn't storage. It was just there. As much as I wanted to keep moving, the sun was almost down. The thought of hiking back out in the dark along that overgrown trail wasn't appealing, and I didn't know if I'd find a better spot before full dark. So I set up my tent, keeping my eyes and ears open the whole time. I kept my knife in my hand. It was a good-sized blade, about 12 inches, and the weight of it felt comforting. I kept looking around, expecting someone to step out of the trees at any second. Night came fast. The trees closed in around me, and the sound of the creek seemed louder in the quiet. I didn't make a fire. I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I ate a cold meal, sitting in the dark, listening. Every crack of a twig or rustle of leaves set my nerves on edge. My tent was small, just enough room for me and my gear, and I lay there with the knife in my hand, staring at the ceiling, hearing noises I couldn't explain. Maybe it was just animals. Maybe it was the wind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was out there watching. I barely slept. I'd drift off for a few minutes, then wake up at the slightest sound. The hours dragged by. I kept checking my watch, waiting for the sky to lighten. When dawn finally came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I didn't waste any time. I packed up as fast as I could, stuffing my gear back into my pack with shaking hands. My eyes kept darting to the trees, expecting movement. But nothing happened. I shouldered my pack and started hiking out, moving fast. The trail seemed even more overgrown on the way back. The spider webs were back across it, as if no one had passed through. My heart was pounding the whole way, and I didn't stop until I reached my car. When I got home, I called the Forest Service. I told them what I'd found and sent them the pictures I'd taken. The guy on the phone sounded interested, but not alarmed. He said they'd send someone to check it out, maybe clean it up. He guessed it was either someone living out there, maybe with a still, or someone growing pot, or just a hermit. But that didn't sit right with me. I'd climbed the sides of that valley, looking for signs of anything, clearings, trails, camps. I didn't see anything that suggested someone was living nearby, and the location was wrong for a still or a grow operation. It was too remote, too hard to get to. The cage, that strange wooden cube, was what stuck in my mind. No matter how much I thought about it, I couldn't come up with a reason for it. It didn't fit with any of the explanations. I never heard back from the Forest Service. I never followed up. Maybe I didn't want to know. A year later, I went camping again, this time in Colorado. Different place, different woods. I thought I'd put that night in Pennsylvania behind me, but nature had other plans. I was asleep in my tent when I woke up to the sound of coyotes. At first it was 1 or 2 yipping and howling, then more joined in. Soon it sounded like there were 20 of them, maybe more, running through my camp. The noise was deafening in the still night air. My dog, who was with me, stayed asleep the whole time. Looking back, that was probably for the best. If he'd woken up and started barking or chasing them, it could have turned bad. The coyotes didn't bother me. They ran through, howling and yipping, and then they were gone. But lying there in the dark, listening to them, I felt that same tight knot of fear in my chest that I'd felt in Pennsylvania. The feeling of being small and alone in the vastness of the wilderness. The feeling that you don't really know what's out there, just beyond the edge of the firelight or the reach of your flashlight. In the end, nothing happened. No one came for me in the night. No hidden danger revealed itself. But the memory of that camp in Pennsylvania sticks with me. The scattered gear, the abandoned camp, the strange wooden cube, the silence of that place. I've been back out into the woods many times since, but I always think twice before setting up camp somewhere that feels off. And when the sun goes down and the woods grow dark, I keep my knife close. Because out there, in the middle of nowhere, you never really know what might be watching. My brother decided to take Chester, our dog, for a walk in the woods that night. It wasn't unusual. We live on a farm out in the countryside in the UK, and those woods start barely 15 meters from our front door. Chester has always been comfortable there. He'd grown up with the trees and the paths, and he'd roamed around them in the dark before, chasing rabbits or sniffing about. We never had a reason to worry. But that night was different. It was just past 10 o'clock, and the air was still. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I was inside, sitting at the kitchen table, when the door swung open, and my brother came rushing in. His face was pale, and I could tell straight away something was wrong. He blurted out that he'd lost Chester. At first, I thought maybe Chester had chased after something, maybe a fox or a badger, but the way my brother spoke made it clear that wasn't it. He explained that his phone had died deep in the woods, and he'd kept Chester close, not wanting to lose him in the dark. But then, as he looked down at the dog by his side, something strange happened. A beam of light, circular and sharp, appeared around his feet for just a second before shooting off into the trees. In that blink of an eye, Chester was gone, just vanished. My brother had called out, searched around as best he could, but the dark and the dead phone made it hopeless. So he'd come back for help. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed a torch and headed out. The night air hit me as soon as I stepped outside. It was colder than I'd expected, damp too, with that earthy smell you only get in the countryside at night. I could hear the wind faintly in the tops of the trees, but near the ground it was still. My boots crunched on the gravel of our drive as I crossed it and stepped into the edge of the woods. I'd walked those woods 1,000 times, day and night, but something felt off. It wasn't just the worry about Chester. It was like the woods were watching, listening. I kept my torch low, sweeping the beam side to side. The light caught on tree trunks, branches, bits of undergrowth. I called Chester's name softly, not wanting to startle him if he was nearby. I walked slowly, listening hard for any sound of him, a bark, a whimper, the rustle of movement. The ground was soft beneath my boots, patches of mud where the rain earlier had soaked in. I could smell it, that mix of damp soil and rotting leaves. Every so often, I'd stop and listen, but the woods stayed quiet. No owls, no fox calls, just my own breathing and the occasional creak of a branch. About 20 seconds in, I spotted him. His shape was just visible behind the thick trunk of an old oak. I felt a rush of relief and called out to him again, more firmly this time. But Chester didn't react how I expected. He didn't bound over like he normally would. He didn't even lift his head properly. He just crept out from behind the tree slow, his tail tucked tight between his legs. His head was low, ears back, and he was moving like he was trying to make himself as small as possible. I'd never seen him like that before. This was the same dog who'd chase deer if I let him, who'd bark at shadows and run headlong into the dark without a second thought. He walked past me without so much as a glance, as if I wasn't even there, and headed straight for the house. I turned to follow, keeping the torch on him, watching the way he moved. Every few steps he'd pause, look back at the woods, then keep going. His whole body language was wrong. He was scared, properly scared of something. And the thing is, I couldn't see or hear anything that might have caused it. No animal sounds, no movement, nothing. Just that heavy stillness that made the night feel heavier somehow. We reached the house, and Chester went straight to his bed. He curled up tight, facing the wall, and didn't move. I stood there for a while, watching him, waiting for him to shake it off, maybe get up and have a drink or wag his tail when I spoke to him. But he didn't. He just lay there, like he was trying to disappear. My brother stood nearby, looking as confused as I felt. We didn't say anything. There wasn't much to say. What could have spooked him that badly? I stayed up for a while after that, sitting by the window, looking out at the woods. I kept expecting to see that beam of light my brother had mentioned, but the night stayed dark. No lights, no sounds, just the gentle sway of the trees in the breeze that had started to pick up. Chester didn't move all night. The next morning, he was quiet, stuck to my side like glue when I took him out. He wouldn't go near the edge of the woods. He did his business quick and dragged me back to the house. It was like he'd aged years overnight. Over the next few days, I tried to get him back to normal, took him for walks during daylight, played with him in the yard. Slowly, he started to perk up, but he never went back into those woods on his own again. Even months later, I'd catch him staring out at the trees, ears back, watching. And me, I kept wondering about that light. I didn't see it myself, only heard about it from my brother, but I believed him. Something had happened out there, something I couldn't explain. We never figured out what it was. The woods stayed the same, quiet and dark, and Chester stayed out of them. And I learned to trust the way animals react, because whatever scared him that night, well, I never wanted to come across it myself.